Your body is not suddenly losing strength. It is slowly deciding that it no longer needs it. What disappears is not taken away by time, but released by the body itself, piece by piece, as the world around you becomes easier than the one it was built for. For most of human history, strength was not trained. It was required just to continue through a normal day. When that requirement fades, the body does not warn you. It simply adjusts, quietly, efficiently, and without resistance. So the loss does not feel like loss. It feels like nothing is happening at all. If strength only exists where it is constantly needed, then what happens when that need disappears without you noticing? And why is your strength disappearing without you noticing? Strength does not live inside the body as something stable or permanent. It is not stored in the way people often imagine, as if it could simply remain there untouched, waiting to be used at any time. Instead, it behaves more like a response, something that only exists because it is constantly being called upon. When the demand is present, the body answers by maintaining what is needed. When the demand fades, the body begins to withdraw that investment, quietly and without urgency. This is not a failure or a flaw. It is a basic principle of how the human organism has always functioned, shaped over a very long period of time in environments where unnecessary effort could become a risk rather than a benefit. In those earlier conditions, energy was limited and survival depended on careful allocation. Every bit of strength that existed had to justify itself through use. Muscles were not kept for appearance or potential. They were maintained because they were required, often daily, just to continue moving through the landscape. Walking long distances, carrying weight, climbing uneven terrain, and adjusting constantly to unstable ground were not optional activities. They were simply part of existing. Because of this, strength was never something a person had to think about preserving. It was preserved automatically by the structure of life itself. The environment made sure of it. If the body stopped maintaining strength, it would immediately become a disadvantage, and the consequences would appear quickly. This constant feedback between the body and the environment created a stable balance. Strength stayed because it had to. What is different now is not the body, but the absence of that constant requirement. The modern environment does not demand the same level of physical response. Many movements that were once unavoidable have been reduced, simplified, or removed entirely. Surfaces are stable, distances are shortened, weight is minimized. Tasks that once required sustained effort are now completed with minimal strain. The body, however, does not recognize these changes as something unusual. It simply responds to what is being asked of it. When less strength is required, less strength is maintained. This process does not announce itself. There is no clear moment when strength is lost. Instead, there is a gradual shift, almost too subtle to notice. Small adjustments accumulate over time. Muscles adapt to lower levels of use. The nervous system becomes more efficient at performing tasks with less effort, which can create the impression that nothing has changed. Daily life continues without interruption, and because there is no immediate failure, there is no reason to suspect that anything is being reduced. From the perspective of the body, this is a form of success. It is conserving energy, aligning itself with the current demands of the environment, just as it always has. The difficulty is that the reference point has changed. In earlier human contexts, the baseline level of physical demand was high and constant. Now, that baseline is much lower, but the body treats it as normal. Strength is not being taken away by some external force. It is being adjusted downward to match a new pattern of living. This is why the process feels invisible. There is no conflict between the body and the environment. They are still aligned. It is simply that the alignment now requires less. If strength only remains where it is continuously required, then the absence of requirement becomes the beginning of its disappearance, even if nothing feels different at all. There is a deeper layer to this principle that often goes unnoticed, because it does not feel like loss at the moment it happens. When the body reduces strength, it does so in a way that preserves function first. Movements that are repeated every day remain possible, sometimes even becoming smoother and more efficient. This creates a quiet illusion that nothing is changing, because the tasks that define normal life continue to be completed without difficulty. The body is not removing the ability to act, it is narrowing the range of what it prepares for. What disappears is not the capacity for the familiar, but the readiness for the unfamiliar. In earlier human conditions, the unfamiliar was not rare. It was part of daily existence. Uneven ground, sudden shifts in terrain, unexpected obstacles, and the constant need to adjust posture and balance required a wide range of physical responses. Strength was not just about lifting or carrying. It was about being prepared for variation, for instability, for situations that could not be predicted in advance. Because of this, the body maintained a broader margin of capability. It held on to strength not only for what was happening, but for what might happen next. That margin is what begins to shrink when the environment becomes more predictable. Modern spaces are designed to reduce uncertainty. Surfaces are flat, paths are clear, objects are shaped to be handled easily. The range of movement required in a typical day becomes narrower, more repetitive, and more controlled. The body responds by focusing only on what is consistently needed. Over time, it lets go of what is not. This is not experienced as a sudden change, because the activities that remain are still within the reduced range. Everything still works. The difference only becomes visible when something falls outside that range. A movement that once felt natural begins to feel demanding. A posture that once felt stable becomes uncomfortable, not because the body has failed, but because it has adapted to a smaller set of expectations. Archaeological evidence of early human life suggests a very different pattern. Skeletal remains often show signs of continuous physical engagement, with bone structures that reflect repeated stress from varied movement. These patterns are not the result of deliberate training. They are the imprint of a life where strength was constantly being used in different ways. There was no clear boundary between activity and rest, between effort and recovery. The body was always adjusting, always responding, always maintaining a wide capacity because it had to. In contrast, modern life separates these elements. Effort becomes something scheduled, optional, and often limited in duration. The rest of the day is shaped to minimize physical demand. The body interprets this pattern as a signal. It does not see the short periods of effort as a reason to maintain a high level of strength. It sees the long periods of low demand as the dominant condition. As a result, it adapts to that condition. The narrowing continues gradually, without drawing attention to itself. What makes this process difficult to notice is that it rarely interferes with routine. The body becomes very good at doing less, and it does so in a way that feels natural. There is no clear threshold where strength is lost. There is only a slow adjustment of what feels normal. The original baseline, shaped over a much longer human past, fades quietly in the background. And because there is no direct comparison in daily experience, there is nothing to signal that a change has occurred. The body is still aligned with its environment. It is simply aligned with a version of life that asks less from it. The process continues in a way that is both consistent and difficult to observe, because it is guided by signals that are subtle and repetitive, rather than sudden or dramatic. The body does not wait for a clear decline before it begins to adjust. It is constantly interpreting patterns of use, measuring what is required across time, and shaping itself to match that requirement as closely as possible. When a certain level of effort is repeated day after day, that level becomes the new standard. Anything beyond it begins to appear unnecessary, not in a conscious sense, but in the quiet calculations of biological efficiency that have guided human survival for a very long time. This is why strength can diminish even when a person feels active. Activity alone does not guarantee maintenance. What matters is the range and intensity of that activity, and whether it continues to challenge the body beyond its current state. In earlier human environments, that challenge was built into the structure of life. Movement was not uniform. It varied in direction, speed, and resistance. Carrying, lifting, climbing, balancing, and walking over uneven ground created a continuous need for adjustment. Each of these actions reinforced a different aspect of strength, creating a system where no single function was isolated. The body developed as an integrated whole, responding to a wide spectrum of demands that could not be simplified or avoided. Archaeological records, including patterns found in bone density and joint wear, suggest that this type of varied movement left a lasting imprint on the human frame. These were not isolated moments of effort, but ongoing conditions that shaped the body over time. In contrast, modern patterns of movement tend to be more limited and repetitive. Even when effort is present, it often occurs within a narrow set of motions, performed in controlled environments where variability is reduced. The body adapts to this by becoming efficient within that narrow range, but less prepared outside of it. This is not immediately noticeable, because daily life rarely requires movement beyond that range. The environment supports the limitation, reinforcing it through consistency. As a result, the body receives the same signals repeatedly and continues to adjust in the same direction. Over time, this creates a gradual shift in baseline capacity. Strength is not removed all at once. It is refined, reduced, and redirected toward what is consistently needed. The original breadth of capability, shaped over much longer periods of human history, becomes less relevant in the context of a simplified environment. What remains is a form of strength that is sufficient for the present, but narrower than before. This narrowing does not feel like loss, because it aligns with the conditions of daily life. It only becomes apparent when those conditions change, or when the body is asked to respond to something outside its usual pattern. At that moment, the difference is felt, not as a sudden failure, but as an unexpected difficulty in movements that once required less thought or effort. The body has not stopped functioning. It has simply adapted to a different set of expectations, shaped by a world that no longer demands the same range of strength it once did. And because this adaptation happens slowly, in alignment with the environment, it remains almost invisible while it is taking place, becoming noticeable only in contrast, never in isolation. The world that shaped the human body was not designed for comfort, and it did not need to be. It only needed to be consistent in one thing: requiring effort. For a very long time, the environment itself acted as a constant source of resistance, shaping how the body moved, how it balanced, and how it maintained strength without any deliberate intention. There were no separate moments for physical demand. The demand was built into the structure of each day. Moving across land was rarely smooth or predictable. Surfaces shifted underfoot, slopes changed direction, and distances could not be shortened or avoided. Even the act of standing still often required subtle adjustments to maintain balance. The body responded to these conditions not by preparing in advance, but by adapting continuously, reinforcing strength through repetition that was inseparable from survival. In that context, strength was not something added to life. It was a direct consequence of being alive within that environment. What is important to understand is that this relationship between body and environment was stable for most of human history. It did not fluctuate rapidly, and it did not provide easy alternatives. If a task required effort, there was no simpler version of that task available. Carrying meant lifting real weight. Traveling meant covering full distance. Reaching something required the body to extend, bend, or climb without assistance. Because of this, the signals sent to the body were clear and consistent. Strength was always required, and so it was always maintained. The environment itself acted as a guide, reinforcing the same patterns across generations. Archaeological evidence supports this view, not through written records but through physical traces. Skeletal structures from earlier periods often show adaptations that reflect regular physical strain, such as thicker bone areas where stress was repeatedly applied and joint formations that indicate varied movement. These are not signs of extreme effort, but of constant, moderate demand spread across time. The body was not pushed occasionally. It was engaged continuously. This is very different from modern conditions, where effort is often separated from daily necessity. Today, many environments are designed to remove resistance wherever possible. Paths are made even. Tools are created to reduce the need for force. Objects are positioned to minimize reaching or bending. These changes are not harmful in themselves, but they alter the signals that the body receives. Instead of constant variation, the body experiences repetition within a limited range. Instead of unavoidable effort, it encounters optional effort. The difference is subtle, but its effects accumulate over time. When effort becomes optional, it also becomes inconsistent. Some days include it, while others do not. The body does not respond strongly to occasional signals. It responds to patterns. If the dominant pattern is one of reduced demand, then the body adapts to that pattern. Strength begins to align with what is regularly required, not with what is occasionally performed. This creates a quiet shift in the baseline of physical capacity. The body is no longer shaped by a world that demands constant engagement, but by one that allows it to do less. The important point is that the body has not changed its fundamental behavior. It is still doing what it has always done, adjusting itself to match the environment as efficiently as possible. What has changed is the environment itself and the signals it sends. Where there was once a steady pressure to maintain strength, there is now a gradual absence of that pressure. And because this absence is not experienced as a disruption, it does not draw attention. It simply becomes part of what feels normal, even as it quietly reshapes what the body is prepared to do. The disappearance of physical demand does not occur as a single change, but as a series of small adjustments that accumulate over time, each one reducing the need for the body to respond with strength. These adjustments are often introduced with the intention of making life more stable, more predictable, and less physically taxing. Paths become smoother, distances become easier to cross, objects become lighter or more accessible, and tasks that once required coordination and force are gradually simplified. None of these changes appear significant on their own, and none of them seem directly connected to the idea of losing strength. Yet together, they reshape the entire pattern of daily movement in a way that the body cannot ignore. In earlier human environments, effort was embedded in the landscape itself. There was no separation between the act of living and the act of moving with resistance. Even simple activities required continuous engagement with the surroundings. The ground was not uniform, requiring constant adjustment of balance and posture. Carrying objects meant adapting to irregular shapes and shifting weight. Traveling meant responding to changes in terrain that could not be predicted in advance. These conditions created a form of natural variation that kept the body active across a wide range of functions. Strength was not focused in one area. It was distributed across many types of movement, each reinforcing the others in subtle ways. The body learned to expect this variation, and it maintained the capacity to respond to it because it was encountered every day. As environments became more controlled, this variation began to disappear. Movement became more linear, more repetitive, and more confined within predictable limits. The body no longer needed to prepare for unexpected changes, because those changes rarely occurred. Instead of adapting to a wide range of conditions, it adapted to a narrow set of repeated actions. This shift is important because it changes the type of signals the body receives. When variation decreases, the need for broad strength decreases as well. The body begins to specialize in what is consistently required and to reduce what is not. This is not experienced as a reduction in ability because the remaining movements are still performed effectively. In fact, they may even feel easier as the body becomes more efficient within that limited range. This efficiency can create a sense of improvement, even as overall capacity is being reduced. The difference lies in what is no longer being maintained. In earlier conditions, the body had to be ready for movements that did not happen every day but could happen at any time. This required a form of preparedness that extended beyond immediate need. In modern conditions, that preparedness is no longer reinforced. The body learns that it does not need to maintain strength for situations that rarely occur. It adjusts accordingly, focusing only on what is regularly encountered. Over time, this leads to a gradual narrowing of physical capability. The body becomes well adapted to its current environment, but less prepared for anything outside of it. This narrowing is not obvious in daily life, because the environment continues to support it. Tasks remain within the reduced range, and the body continues to perform them without difficulty. There is no clear moment where something is lost. Instead, there is a slow shift in what feels normal. Movements that once required little effort may begin to feel more demanding, but this change is often attributed to other factors, such as fatigue or aging, rather than to a long-term adjustment in strength. The connection between environment and capacity remains hidden, because the transition is gradual and continuous. The body is still doing what it has always done, aligning itself with the conditions it experiences most often. It is simply responding to a world that asks less of it, and in doing so, it becomes less prepared to give more. What makes this shift difficult to recognize is that the environment does not feel easier in a way that draws attention. It feels normal because it is consistent. The body does not compare present conditions to those of a distant past. It responds only to what is repeated now. When resistance is gradually removed from daily life, There is no clear moment of contrast, no sharp boundary that signals a change. Instead, there is a steady alignment between the body and a world that quietly asks less from it. This alignment feels stable, even comfortable, because it reduces strain and unpredictability. But within that stability, something important is no longer being reinforced. In earlier human settings, the environment itself acted as a continuous reminder that strength was necessary. Movement was rarely isolated or optional. It was woven into every part of existence. Reaching water, gathering food, building shelter, or simply relocating required a level of engagement that could not be reduced or postponed. These actions did not occur under controlled conditions. They unfolded within landscapes that introduced constant variation, requiring the body to adapt moment by moment. This variation was not extreme, but it was persistent. It ensured that the body maintained a wide range of physical responses, even when no single movement seemed demanding on its own. The cumulative effect of these small demands created a form of strength that was both stable and adaptable. In contrast, modern environments tend to separate effort from necessity. Tasks are structured to minimize unpredictability, and many forms of movement are no longer required to complete basic activities. The body encounters fewer situations that require adjustment, fewer moments where balance, coordination, and force must be combined in response to changing conditions. Instead, it operates within a narrow set of repeated patterns that are easy to perform and rarely interrupted. This repetition sends a clear signal. Only this range of movement is needed. Over time, the body refines itself to match that signal, reducing the capacity that lies outside of it. This reduction is not experienced as a loss, because it does not interfere with routine. Everything that needs to be done can still be done. The environment supports the limitation by keeping demands within the reduced range. There is no immediate consequence, no sudden failure that would draw attention to the change. The body continues to function, and because it functions, the change remains invisible. What disappears is not the ability to act, but the readiness to act beyond what is familiar. This distinction is subtle, but it is central to understanding why strength can fade without being noticed. The body is not becoming incapable, it is becoming specialized in a narrower context. It is aligning itself more precisely with a world that has been simplified in ways that reduce the need for broad physical engagement. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations lived in conditions where such specialization would have been a disadvantage. The environment required flexibility, not efficiency within a single pattern. Strength was maintained across many forms because no single form was sufficient. That requirement no longer exists in the same way. The modern environment provides a consistent structure that allows the body to operate within limited boundaries. The body accepts those boundaries as normal and adjusts itself accordingly. This is why the loss of strength does not feel like a decline. It feels like a continuation of what has always been true, even though the underlying conditions have changed. The environment no longer presses against the body in the same way, and without that pressure, the body has no reason to maintain what is no longer being asked of it. Movement in the human body was never meant to be reduced to a set of controlled, repeated actions. It originally existed as a response to an environment that required constant adjustment, where each step, each shift in balance, and each change in direction carried small variations that the body had to answer in real time. Over a long period of human history, this variation was not something unusual, it was the structure of daily life. Walking did not follow a straight, predictable line. Carrying did not involve evenly balanced loads. Even resting positions required subtle muscular engagement to maintain stability on uneven ground. The body adapted to this by developing a form of strength that was distributed and responsive, rather than concentrated in isolated movements. What is different now is not that movement has disappeared, but that it has been reorganized into a narrower and more efficient form. Many actions that once required continuous adjustment have been simplified into predictable sequences. Paths are leveled, objects are designed to be easily handled, and environments are arranged to reduce the need for unexpected changes in posture or direction. This creates a pattern of movement that is smoother and more consistent, but also more limited in its demands. The body begins to operate within this limited pattern, repeating the same types of actions with minimal variation. Over time, it becomes highly efficient at performing these actions, but less prepared for movements that fall outside of them. Efficiency, in this context, does not mean maintaining strength in a broad sense. It means reducing effort wherever possible. The body learns to complete tasks using the least amount of energy required, refining its responses to match the exact level of demand. This is a useful adaptation, but it comes with a consequence. When effort is consistently minimized, the body has no reason to maintain capacity beyond that minimum. Strength begins to align with efficiency rather than with potential. It becomes just enough to handle what is regularly encountered, and no more. In earlier environments, such a reduction would have created immediate difficulty because variation was unavoidable. A path might change without warning, a load might shift, or a surface might become unstable. The body needed a margin of strength to respond to these changes, even if they did not occur constantly. That margin was maintained because it was repeatedly tested. In modern conditions, that testing rarely happens. The environment removes many of the small challenges that once required adjustment. As a result, the margin is no longer reinforced. It begins to shrink, not because the body is failing, but because it is adapting to a world that no longer demands that extra capacity. This process is gradual and does not interfere with routine movement. The body continues to perform familiar actions smoothly, often with less effort than before. This can create a sense of improvement, as tasks feel easier and require less strain. However, this ease is not a sign of increased strength. It is a sign of reduced demand. The body is becoming more precise within a limited range, while letting go of what lies beyond it. The difference becomes noticeable only when a movement requires more than the usual pattern. At that point, the body must respond without the margin it once maintained. The movement feels heavier, slower, or less stable, not because it is new, but because the body is no longer prepared for it in the same way. From an evolutionary perspective, this reflects a shift from a system built for variation to one shaped by consistency. The body continues to follow the same principles it always has, adjusting itself to match the demands it encounters most often. What has changed is the nature of those demands. Movement has been reorganized to remove complexity, and in doing so, it has reduced the need for broad strength. The body responds by narrowing its capacity, aligning itself with a pattern that is efficient but limited, and allowing strength to fade in the areas that are no longer required. The shift toward efficiency changes not only how the body moves, but how it interprets effort itself. When movements become smoother and more predictable, the body begins to treat them as low-cost activities, even if they still involve some level of exertion. Over time, this creates a new internal expectation that movement should feel easy, controlled, and consistent. Any action that falls outside of this expectation begins to feel unusually demanding, not because it is objectively extreme, but because the body has adapted to a narrower definition of normal effort. This is a subtle but important transition. In earlier human environments, effort was not something to be minimized in the same way. It was something to be navigated continuously, with the body adjusting its response to match changing conditions rather than avoiding them. A path that became steeper or more uneven did not signal a problem to be removed. It signaled a need for the body to adapt in that moment. Strength was maintained through this ongoing negotiation between the body and its surroundings. The body did not expect movement to remain within a comfortable range. It expected variation, and it prepared for it by maintaining a wider capacity. As modern environments reduce variation, they also reduce the need for this negotiation. Movements are designed to remain within a controlled range where outcomes are predictable and effort can be managed precisely. The body responds by refining its performance within that range, becoming more efficient at repeating the same actions with minimal energy. This refinement can give the impression of stability, because it reduces fluctuations in effort and makes daily movement feel consistent. However, it also removes the small, irregular challenges that once reinforced broader strength. Without those challenges, the body no longer receives the signals that would prompt it to maintain that wider capacity. Instead, it begins to specialize in what is most frequently required. This specialization is not experienced as a limitation, because it aligns with the environment. Tasks remain manageable, and the body continues to function effectively within its usual pattern. The difference only becomes apparent when the pattern changes, even slightly. A movement that requires a different type of coordination, a shift in balance, or a higher level of force may feel disproportionately difficult. This is not because the movement itself is unusual in a broader human sense. It is because the body has adapted to a narrower set of expectations, and anything outside of those expectations requires a response that is no longer well maintained. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations were exposed to a wide range of movement conditions, even within a single day. This exposure created a form of physical resilience that was not tied to specific tasks, but to the ability to adjust across many different situations. Strength, in this context, was not a fixed quantity. It was a flexible capacity, shaped by constant interaction with a variable environment. In modern conditions, that variability is reduced, and with it, the need for flexibility. The body becomes more precise but less adaptable. This trade-off is not immediately visible, because precision supports the tasks that are most commonly performed. It allows the body to operate efficiently within a limited range, reinforcing the sense that nothing has changed. But beneath that surface, the broader capacity is no longer being maintained. The body is not losing strength in a dramatic or noticeable way. It is gradually redefining what strength means, aligning it with a pattern of movement that is simpler, more controlled, and less demanding than the one it was originally shaped to meet. Over time, this pattern of efficient and repeated movement begins to shape not only how the body acts, but how it anticipates action. The body does not simply respond in the moment, it prepares in advance based on what it expects to happen. When daily movement follows a narrow and predictable path, the body begins to prepare only for that path. Muscles engage in familiar sequences, joints move within familiar angles, and the nervous system reduces its readiness for variation that rarely appears. This anticipation is quiet, almost invisible, but it has a direct effect on how strength is maintained. What is no longer expected is no longer prepared for, and what is not prepared for gradually fades from the body's active capacity. In earlier human environments, anticipation worked differently. The body could not rely on predictability because the landscape itself was constantly changing. A surface that appeared stable could shift, a path could narrow, or an object being carried could move in unexpected ways. These conditions required the body to remain broadly prepared, holding on to a wider range of possible responses. Strength, in this sense, was not tied to a single action, but to the ability to adjust across many different actions without hesitation. The body maintained this readiness because it was repeatedly confirmed by experience. Variation was not occasional. It was constant enough to shape expectation. In modern conditions, the absence of variation changes this expectation. The body learns that most movements will unfold in a consistent and controlled manner. It begins to reduce its preparation accordingly, focusing only on what is regularly encountered. This reduction is efficient, because it lowers the cost of maintaining unused capacity. However, it also narrows the range of strength that is actively supported. The body becomes highly prepared for what is familiar, but less prepared for what is not. This is not experienced as a loss, because the familiar continues to dominate daily life. Tasks are completed without difficulty, and the environment continues to reinforce the same patterns. The difference remains hidden until a movement requires a level of readiness that is no longer maintained. At that point, the body must respond without the preparation it once had. The movement may feel unstable, slower, or more effortful than expected, not because the movement is new, but because the body has adjusted its expectations away from it. From an evolutionary perspective, this reflects a shift in the relationship between the body and its surroundings. The body still follows the same principle of aligning itself with repeated conditions, but the conditions themselves have changed. Where there was once a need for constant readiness, there is now a tendency toward controlled repetition. Strength adapts to that tendency, becoming more specific and less general. The broader capacity, once supported by continuous variation, is no longer reinforced and begins to fade. This fading is gradual and does not interrupt routine function. The body continues to operate effectively within its expected range, and because that range is rarely exceeded, there is little opportunity to notice what has changed. The disappearance of strength is not marked by a clear event. It is embedded in the shift from a world that required preparation for the unexpected to one that allows the body to expect very little beyond what it already knows. The body does not hold on to strength out of caution or long-term planning. It does not preserve capacity simply because it might be useful someday. Instead, it follows a much more immediate rule: maintain what is being used, reduce what is not. This rule is deeply rooted in biological efficiency, shaped over long periods of human history where energy had to be carefully managed. Every process inside the body carries a cost, and maintaining unused strength is not neutral. It requires resources, coordination, and continuous support from systems that are designed to respond only to clear signals. When those signals are absent, the body begins to adjust, not abruptly, but in a slow and consistent direction toward reduction. This adjustment is not a sign of decline. It is a form of adaptation that has always allowed humans to survive within changing environments. In earlier conditions, the signals that maintained strength were constant and unavoidable. Movement was not optional, and it did not occur within a narrow range. The body was regularly exposed to demands that required force, balance, and coordination across different situations. These repeated demands acted as a continuous instruction, telling the body to preserve a wide capacity. Muscles were reinforced not because they were intentionally trained, but because they were needed. Neural pathways remained active because they were repeatedly used. The body maintained strength because the environment made it necessary to do so. In that context, reducing strength would have created immediate difficulty, because the conditions of life did not allow for prolonged periods of low demand. The modern environment sends a different set of signals. Many of the movements that once required effort have been simplified, reduced, or removed entirely. The body experiences long stretches of time where physical demand remains low and consistent. Even when moments of effort occur, they are often brief and isolated, surrounded by periods of minimal activity. From the perspective of the body, these short signals are not enough to justify maintaining a high level of strength. What matters is the dominant pattern, and when that pattern is one of reduced demand, the body adapts to it. It begins to lower its baseline, aligning itself with what is most frequently required rather than what is occasionally performed. This process is subtle and does not produce immediate sensations of loss. The body does not signal that it is reducing strength, because from its perspective, it is simply becoming more efficient. It is removing what is no longer needed, freeing resources for other functions that align with the current environment. This efficiency can even create a sense of ease in daily movement, as tasks require less effort within the reduced range of capacity. The body feels balanced, not weakened, because it is matched to its surroundings. The difficulty is that this balance is based on a limited set of demands. Strength that falls outside of those demands is no longer supported, and over time, it fades. Archaeological evidence suggests that earlier human populations did not experience this kind of prolonged reduction in demand. Their environments did not allow for extended periods where strength was unnecessary. Even in moments of rest, the surrounding conditions often required a level of readiness that prevented the body from fully disengaging. This continuous engagement reinforced a broader capacity, ensuring that strength was maintained across different forms of movement. The body was not holding on to strength as a reserve. It was maintaining it because it was always in use. In contrast, the modern body learns that much of its potential is not required on a regular basis. It adjusts accordingly, reducing what it does not need to support. This reduction does not feel like a loss because it happens in alignment with the environment. There is no conflict, no resistance, and no clear signal that something has changed. The body simply becomes more precise, more efficient, and more limited at the same time, following a rule that has always guided it, but now applied to a world that asks less from it. This quiet reduction follows a direction that is consistent across many biological systems, not only in how muscles behave, but in how the body organizes itself as a whole. The body is not designed to preserve excess capacity in the absence of clear demand. It is designed to match its structure to its most frequent conditions, refining itself toward what is repeated and letting go of what is not. This is why strength does not simply remain unchanged when it is no longer required. It is gradually adjusted downward, step by step, in response to signals that are often too subtle to notice. The process does not involve a single point of decision. It unfolds continuously, shaped by patterns that repeat over long periods of time. When those patterns contain limited physical demand, the direction of change becomes almost inevitable. In earlier human environments, this direction was constantly interrupted by variation. Even if one day involved less movement, the next might require more. The body could not settle into a narrow pattern because the environment did not allow it to remain stable for long. Strength was reinforced through this ongoing fluctuation, preventing the kind of gradual reduction that occurs in more controlled settings. The signals sent to the body were not uniform. They shifted with terrain, weather, available resources, and the unpredictable nature of daily life. Because of this, the body maintained a broader range of readiness, holding on to strength across different forms of movement without needing to distinguish between them. In contrast, modern conditions provide a level of consistency that allows the body to stabilize around a lower level of demand. Days begin to resemble one another in terms of physical effort. Movements are repeated in similar ways, often within environments that are carefully designed to reduce variation. This repetition creates a clear pattern, and the body responds by aligning itself more closely with that pattern over time. What is not included in that pattern begins to fade, not because it is actively removed, but because it is no longer supported. The body does not maintain what it does not experience regularly. This applies not only to large movements, but also to small adjustments that once occurred without notice. Subtle shifts in balance, changes in posture, and variations in force that were once part of daily activity become less frequent. As they disappear, the systems that supported them become less active. Strength is reduced not in a single area, but across many small components that together form a broader capacity. The result is not a dramatic loss, but a gradual narrowing that is difficult to perceive from within. What makes this process particularly invisible is that it is accompanied by a sense of stability. The body becomes well adapted to its current environment, performing required tasks with ease and consistency. There is no immediate disadvantage, no clear signal that something important is being lost. The environment continues to support the reduced capacity, keeping demands within a range that the body can handle. This creates a feedback loop, where reduced strength is both the result of the environment and the condition that the environment continues to accommodate. Over time, this loop reinforces itself, making the reduction feel normal and unremarkable. Archaeological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations lived within systems where such loops were less likely to form. The environment did not adjust to the body in the same way. Instead, the body had to adjust continuously to the environment, maintaining strength as a response to external conditions that could not be controlled. This difference is subtle but significant. In modern life, the environment often adapts to human limitations, reducing the need for the body to maintain broader capacity. As a result, the signals that once sustained strength become weaker, and the body follows those signals without resistance. The reduction continues quietly, guided by patterns that feel stable and familiar, even as they lead the body toward a narrower form of strength that no longer reflects the full range it was once built to maintain. The final layer of this process lies in how completely the body accepts the new level as its reference point. Once a reduced pattern of demand has been repeated long enough, the body no longer treats it as a temporary condition. It begins to treat it as the standard. Strength is then maintained only in relation to that standard, not in relation to anything that came before. This shift is quiet, but it changes how the body organizes itself at a fundamental level. What once required preparation is no longer anticipated. What once demanded effort is no longer expected. The body recalibrates its sense of what is normal, and in doing so, it narrows the range of strength it continues to support. This recalibration is not conscious. It happens through repeated signals that shape how the body allocates energy and attention over time. In earlier human environments, such a stable recalibration was difficult to maintain. Conditions changed too often for the body to settle into a narrow baseline. Even if a period of lower demand occurred, it was usually followed by a return to more varied and unpredictable movement. The body remained flexible because it had to. It could not afford to commit fully to a reduced state, because the environment would eventually require more from it again. Strength was therefore preserved across a wider range, not as a reserve but as a necessary response to uncertainty. In modern conditions, the stability of the environment allows recalibration to take hold more completely. Days repeat with similar levels of effort, and the absence of variation reinforces the idea that nothing more is needed. The body adjusts its internal expectations to match this pattern, gradually lowering the level of strength it considers necessary. This does not happen in a single step. It unfolds slowly, as each repeated day confirms the same message. The body receives no contradictory signal, no demand that would require it to expand its capacity again. As a result, the reduced baseline becomes more firmly established over time. What makes this process difficult to recognize is that it does not produce immediate limitations. The body continues to perform within its expected range, and because that range aligns with daily life, there is no clear disruption. The environment supports the recalibrated state, keeping demands within limits that the body can meet. This creates a sense of continuity, where everything feels as it always has, even though the underlying capacity has changed. The difference only becomes visible when the body is placed in a situation that exceeds this recalibrated range. A movement that once required little preparation now requires more effort. A task that once felt natural now feels less stable or more demanding. These moments are often interpreted as isolated difficulties, rather than as signs of a broader shift that has been developing over time. From an evolutionary perspective, this reflects a continuation of the same adaptive principle that has always guided the human body. It aligns itself with repeated conditions, optimizing for efficiency within the environment it experiences most often. What has changed is the nature of that environment. It now allows the body to settle into a narrower range without being challenged to expand again. Strength is not actively removed. It is simply no longer reinforced beyond what is needed for the present. The body accepts this state as normal, maintaining it without resistance. And because this acceptance happens gradually, without clear markers of change, the disappearance of strength remains almost entirely unnoticed. Even as it becomes the new baseline from which all movement begins, the loss of strength rarely begins with a feeling of weakness. It begins much earlier, at a stage where everything still feels manageable, where daily movements continue without interruption, and where the body appears to function as it always has. This is what makes the process difficult to detect. The body does not signal that it is becoming weaker because, within its current range of activity, it is not failing. It is meeting the demands placed upon it with efficiency. From the inside, there is no clear contrast, no immediate sense that something has been reduced. Instead, there is a quiet continuation of normal experience, shaped by an environment that no longer requires the same level of strength it once did. In earlier human conditions, such a gap between capacity and demand was much smaller. The body was often operating close to its limits, not in extreme ways, but in consistent, moderate ways that required ongoing engagement. Movement was not confined to a narrow range. It extended across different forms, requiring balance, coordination, and force in combination. Because of this, any reduction in strength would have been quickly noticed. The environment would have revealed it through difficulty, forcing the body to respond and maintain its capacity. There was little space for unnoticed decline, because the demands of daily life continuously tested the body's readiness. In modern conditions, this constant testing is largely absent. The environment supports a level of activity that can be maintained even as strength gradually decreases. Tasks remain within a range that does not require the body to reach beyond its current capacity. This creates a separation between what the body is capable of and what it is required to do. As long as the required level remains low, the body can continue to function without revealing the reduction that is taking place. The result is a form of hidden change, where strength fades beneath the surface of normal activity. This hidden nature is reinforced by the way the body adapts to maintain performance. When strength begins to decrease, the body often compensates by becoming more efficient in the movements that remain. It refines coordination, reduces unnecessary effort, and relies more heavily on familiar patterns. These adjustments allow tasks to be completed with less strain, creating the impression that nothing has changed. In some cases, movement may even feel easier because the body has optimized itself for a narrower range of actions. This sense of ease can mask the underlying reduction in capacity, making it even less likely to be noticed. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that earlier human populations did not experience this kind of sustained masking. Their environments did not allow for long periods where reduced capacity could go unnoticed. The physical demands of daily life acted as a continuous check, revealing any change in strength through immediate feedback. The body could not rely on efficiency alone, because variation in movement required a broader range of responses. Strength was maintained not only because it was needed, but because it was constantly tested in different ways. The difference in modern conditions is not that strength is no longer useful, but that it is no longer required at the same level or with the same consistency. The body adapts to this by lowering its baseline, while still maintaining enough capacity to meet everyday demands. This creates a situation where strength can decline without producing obvious signs. The body remains functional, aligned with its environment, and capable within its usual range. It is only when that range is exceeded that the change becomes visible, and even then, it may not be recognized as part of a larger pattern. The disappearance of strength begins long before weakness is felt, unfolding quietly within a system that continues to operate without interruption, guided by demands that no longer reflect the full range of what the body was once built to do. The body not only allows this early reduction to pass unnoticed, it actively reorganizes itself to preserve the appearance of stability while the underlying capacity changes. When strength begins to decline in areas that are not frequently used, the body shifts its reliance toward movements and muscles that are still active. This redistribution does not restore what is lost, but it creates a functional balance that hides the reduction. The body becomes more selective, using what remains more precisely, avoiding what is no longer well supported. From the outside, nothing seems different. From the inside, the system has quietly rearranged itself. This rearrangement is guided by patterns that repeat across time. The body pays attention to what is used most often and reinforces those pathways, allowing them to carry more of the load. Other pathways, which once contributed to a broader form of strength, begin to fade as they are used less frequently. This does not produce an immediate gap in function, because the remaining structures compensate. Movements are still completed, but they are completed in a slightly different way, with a narrower distribution of effort. Over time, this narrowing becomes the new pattern, and the body continues to refine itself around it. In earlier human environments, such a redistribution would have been difficult to sustain. Movement required coordination across many parts of the body, often in unpredictable combinations. If one area became less capable, the environment would expose that limitation quickly. There was less opportunity for the body to compensate by shifting effort elsewhere, because tasks were not uniform. They demanded full participation from multiple systems at once. This created a form of balance where strength had to be maintained across a wider range, rather than concentrated in a few frequently used patterns. The body could not rely on selective efficiency, because the environment did not allow movement to remain consistent. In modern conditions, consistency makes this selective adaptation possible. Tasks are often performed in the same way, within the same range, using the same sequences of movement. The body learns these sequences and reinforces them, gradually reducing its reliance on other capacities that are no longer needed. This process feels natural because it improves performance within the familiar context. Movements become smoother, more controlled, and less demanding. The body appears to function well, even as its overall range of strength becomes more limited. What disappears is not the ability to complete tasks, but the diversity of ways in which those tasks can be performed. This loss of diversity is subtle, but it has important consequences. When the body is faced with a situation that requires a different pattern of movement, it must respond without the support it once had. The redistribution that preserved stability within a narrow range now becomes a limitation outside of it. The body is forced to rely on structures that are already carrying most of the load, increasing the sense of effort and reducing stability. These moments reveal the change, but only in contrast to the expectation that movement should feel easy. Without that contrast, the reduction remains hidden. From an evolutionary perspective, this reflects a shift from a system that maintained balance through variation to one that maintains balance through repetition. The body continues to adapt efficiently, but the direction of that adaptation has changed. It no longer supports a wide distribution of strength because the environment does not require it. Instead, It concentrates strength where it is most often used, allowing other areas to fade. This concentration creates the impression of stability, but it is built on a narrower foundation. The disappearance of strength is not a sudden loss, but a gradual reorganization that preserves function while quietly reducing capacity, making the change almost impossible to notice as it unfolds. As this quiet reorganization continues, another subtle effect begins to take shape, one that makes the loss of strength even harder to recognize. The body not only reduces and redistributes its capacity, it also adjusts the way effort is perceived. Movements that once required a certain level of force begin to feel more demanding, but instead of being recognized as a change in the body, they are often interpreted as a feature of the task itself. The environment becomes the reference point, not the body. A slope feels steeper, a load feels heavier, a distance feels longer, even though these conditions have not changed. What has changed is the body's internal capacity to respond, but this change is not immediately identified because the body has already adapted its expectations to a lower baseline. This shift in perception is gradual and closely tied to repeated experience. When the body encounters the same level of demand over time, it calibrates its sense of effort around that level. Anything above it begins to feel unusually difficult, not because it is extreme in an absolute sense, but because it lies outside of what the body now considers normal. In earlier human environments, such recalibration was less stable. Variation in daily movement prevented the body from settling into a narrow expectation of effort. Some tasks required more force, others less, and this fluctuation kept the body's sense of capacity flexible. Effort was not fixed to a single reference point. It expanded and contracted in response to changing conditions, maintaining a broader awareness of what the body could do. In modern conditions, where movement is more consistent and predictable, this flexibility diminishes. The body becomes accustomed to a limited range of effort, and its perception adjusts accordingly. This adjustment reinforces the underlying reduction in strength because it reduces the likelihood that the body will be pushed beyond its current limits. Tasks that feel demanding are often avoided or modified, not out of conscious choice, but because they fall outside of the familiar range. The environment supports this tendency by offering alternatives that require less effort, allowing the body to remain within its reduced capacity. Over time, this creates a cycle where reduced strength leads to reduced exposure to higher demands, which in turn reinforces the reduction. The body is not forced to confront its changing capacity, and so the change continues without interruption. Archaeological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations were less able to avoid such confrontations. The environment did not provide consistent alternatives. When a task required effort, it had to be completed within the available conditions. This created repeated exposure to varying levels of demand, preventing the body from settling into a narrow perception of effort. Strength was maintained not only through use, but through the necessity of responding to conditions that could not be adjusted or simplified. The body remained connected to a wider range of possibilities because it was regularly required to engage with them. In contrast, modern life allows the body to remain within a controlled range, both in movement and in perception. Effort is no longer a shifting experience, but a stable one, defined by repetition and predictability. This stability makes it difficult to notice when the underlying capacity changes because the reference point remains fixed. The body continues to feel as though it is functioning normally, even as its ability to respond to greater demands diminishes. The disappearance of strength is therefore not only a physical process, but also a perceptual one. It unfolds within a system that continuously adjusts both capacity and expectation, keeping them aligned in a way that hides the difference between what the body once maintained and what it now considers enough. In earlier human conditions, the idea of avoiding physical demand did not exist in the way it does now. Movement was not a separate activity that could be postponed or reduced. It was built into the process of living, woven into every action required to continue from one moment to the next. The body did not decide whether to use strength. It used strength because there was no alternative. This constant engagement created a relationship between the body and its environment that was direct and unavoidable. Each day presented a series of tasks that required physical response, not as an added challenge, but as a basic condition of survival. The body adapted to this by maintaining strength as a continuous necessity rather than as a reserve. Walking was not simply a way to move from one place to another. It involved adjusting to surfaces that were uneven, shifting, or unpredictable. Carrying was not limited to evenly distributed loads, but often required managing weight that changed position and balance. Even resting did not fully remove physical engagement, as the body had to maintain stability in positions that were not always supported or comfortable. These small, repeated demands created a steady flow of signals that reinforced strength across different systems. The body did not need to be reminded to maintain capacity, because it was constantly being used in varied ways. Archaeological evidence reflects this pattern through the physical traces left behind in skeletal remains. Bone structures often show signs of repeated stress, not from isolated events, but from continuous interaction with the environment. Joint surfaces indicate movement across multiple angles, suggesting that the body was regularly exposed to variation rather than confined to a single pattern. These traces do not point to extreme effort, but to consistent engagement. Strength was not developed in isolated moments. It was maintained through the repetition of necessary actions spread across time. In this context, the body could not reduce its capacity without immediate consequence. Any decrease in strength would have affected the ability to perform essential tasks, making it difficult to sustain daily life. The environment acted as a constant check, revealing even small changes through increased effort or reduced stability. There was little opportunity for the body to adjust downward without being corrected by the demands it faced. This created a form of balance where strength remained aligned with necessity, not because it was preserved intentionally, but because it was always required. In modern conditions, this direct relationship has been altered. Many of the actions that once required continuous effort can now be performed with minimal physical demand. The body is no longer exposed to the same level of unavoidable variation, and as a result, it receives fewer signals that would reinforce a broad range of strength. The absence of these signals does not feel like a loss, because the environment continues to support the reduced level of engagement. Tasks remain achievable, and the body continues to function within its usual range. What has changed is not the ability to act, but the necessity of maintaining a wider capacity. The body responds to this change in the same way it always has, by aligning itself with what is most frequently required. Strength becomes concentrated around the limited set of movements that define daily life, while other capacities gradually fade. This process does not interrupt routine, and because it unfolds within a stable environment, it remains largely unnoticed. The body is still adapting, still responding, still functioning as it was designed to do. It is simply doing so in a context that no longer demands the same level of continuous physical engagement, allowing strength to diminish in ways that feel natural and unremarkable, even though they represent a significant shift from the conditions that once shaped the human form. What made this constant use of strength so effective was not its intensity, but its continuity. The body did not need to be pushed to extremes in order to maintain a broad capacity. It only needed to be engaged often enough, across enough different situations, for strength to remain relevant. In earlier human environments, this continuity was unavoidable. There were no clear boundaries between effort and rest, no long periods where the body could remain inactive without consequence. Even during moments that might be considered rest, the surrounding conditions often required subtle forms of engagement. Sitting, standing, or lying down were not fully passive states. They involved maintaining balance on uneven surfaces, adjusting posture in response to temperature or terrain, and remaining aware of the environment. These small demands did not feel significant on their own, but they accumulated across time, reinforcing strength in a steady and consistent way. The body adapted to this pattern by maintaining a level of readiness that extended beyond any single task. Strength was not reserved for moments of high demand. It was distributed across daily activity, supported by the repetition of moderate effort rather than by occasional bursts of intensity. This distribution created a stable foundation, where different parts of the body were engaged regularly, preventing any one area from becoming inactive for long periods. The environment itself ensured that variation remained present, even within routine. A path taken each day might still present small differences in surface or slope. Objects carried might shift slightly in weight or position. Weather conditions could alter how the body moved, requiring adjustments that kept multiple systems active. This variability, combined with continuity, formed a structure where strength was maintained almost automatically. Archaeological findings suggest that such patterns left consistent traces in the human body. Bones show signs of adaptation to repeated loading, with density reflecting ongoing stress rather than isolated effort. Joint wear indicates movement across different ranges, suggesting that the body was not confined to a single pattern of motion. These observations support the idea that strength in earlier human populations was not the result of specific training, but of a lifestyle where physical engagement was constant and varied. The body was shaped by the environment in a way that made reduction difficult, because there were few opportunities for prolonged inactivity or repetition within a narrow range. In modern conditions, the absence of continuity plays a significant role in how strength is maintained. Physical effort is often separated from daily necessity, occurring in isolated periods that do not extend across the entire day. The body may experience moments of engagement, but they are surrounded by longer periods of low demand. From the perspective of the body, these moments are not enough to define the overall pattern. What matters is the dominant condition, and when that condition involves minimal physical requirement, the body adapts to that baseline. The continuity that once reinforced strength is no longer present, and without it, the signals needed to maintain a broad capacity become weaker. Over time, this leads to a gradual reduction, not because the body is incapable of maintaining strength, but because it is no longer being asked to do so consistently. The body continues to function efficiently within its current environment, but that efficiency is built on a narrower foundation. Strength remains where it is regularly used, but it is no longer supported across the full range of movements that once defined human activity. The disappearance is quiet, shaped not by sudden change, but by the steady absence of continuous demand that once made strength a constant part of everyday life. The absence of choice in earlier human life did more than simply increase physical demand. It removed the possibility of long-term avoidance. The body could not gradually withdraw from effort without being corrected by the environment. Each day presented tasks that required participation, and these tasks could not be replaced with easier alternatives. This created a form of reinforcement that was both consistent and unavoidable. Strength was not something that needed to be protected or maintained through intention. It was preserved because there was no path that allowed it to disappear without consequence. The environment ensured that any reduction in capacity would be immediately revealed, not through sudden failure, but through increased difficulty in actions that could not be avoided. This immediate feedback played a crucial role in keeping the body aligned with its surroundings. If strength began to decline, the body would encounter resistance in the next required task. That resistance would act as a signal, prompting adaptation in the opposite direction. The body would respond by reinforcing what had begun to fade, restoring its capacity to meet the demand. This process did not require awareness or deliberate effort. It was guided by the constant interaction between the body and an environment that did not adjust to human limitation. Strength remained stable because any deviation from necessity was corrected through repeated exposure to real conditions. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that this feedback loop was a defining feature of early human life. The environment did not provide consistent opportunities to reduce effort. Movement remained varied, tasks remained necessary, and the body was continuously engaged in ways that prevented long-term decline. The absence of choice created a system where strength was maintained not through effort in isolated moments, but through the structure of daily existence itself. The body could not settle into a lower level of demand because the environment would not support it. In modern conditions, this feedback loop is weakened. The environment often adapts to the body, providing alternatives that reduce the need for effort. When a task feels demanding, it can be modified, postponed, or avoided altogether. This ability to adjust the environment changes the relationship between the body and its surroundings. Instead of being corrected by resistance, the body is allowed to remain within a comfortable range. Reduction in strength is no longer immediately revealed because the environment continues to support the body at its current level. This removes the signals that would prompt reinforcement, allowing the gradual decline to continue without interruption. The body interprets the absence of resistance as a stable condition, aligning itself with a lower level of demand. What once would have been corrected through necessity is now allowed to persist. Over time, this creates a different form of balance, one where strength is maintained only within the limits that the environment continues to accommodate. The body is not failing to adapt. It is adapting precisely to the conditions it experiences, but those conditions no longer require the same level of engagement. The disappearance of strength is therefore not the result of a single change, but of a system that no longer provides the feedback needed to sustain it. Without the constant presence of unavoidable demand, the body is free to reduce its capacity, and it does so in a way that feels natural, stable, and largely invisible. Modern life does not remove strength directly. It removes the resistance that once made strength necessary. This distinction is subtle, but it changes everything about how the body maintains itself. In earlier human environments, resistance was not an obstacle to be eliminated. It was a constant presence that shaped how every action was performed. The ground pushed back with uneven surfaces, objects resisted with unpredictable weight, and distance demanded sustained effort without interruption. The body did not seek to avoid these conditions. It adapted to them, using them as continuous signals to maintain a wide range of strength. In contrast, modern environments are built to reduce resistance wherever possible. This reduction is often seen as progress, because it makes tasks easier and more efficient. Surfaces are leveled so that walking requires less adjustment. Tools are designed to minimize the force needed to lift or carry. Systems are organized to shorten distance and simplify movement. These changes are not harmful in themselves, but they alter the relationship between the body and its surroundings in a fundamental way. The body is no longer required to respond to constant resistance. Instead, it moves through a world that has been shaped to remove that resistance before it is even encountered. This removal changes the signals that guide adaptation. When resistance is present, the body must engage multiple systems at once to maintain balance, coordination, and force. These combined demands reinforce strength across different areas, creating a form of stability that is supported by variation. When resistance is reduced, these combined demands begin to disappear. Movements become more isolated, more predictable, and less physically demanding. The body responds by refining itself within this simplified pattern, maintaining only what is required to perform the available tasks. Strength that lies outside of this pattern is no longer reinforced, and over time, it begins to fade. What makes this process difficult to recognize is that it improves efficiency within the remaining range. Tasks feel easier, movement feels smoother, and the body appears to function without strain. This sense of ease can be mistaken for stability or even improvement, because it reduces the immediate experience of effort. However, this ease is not the result of increased capacity. It is the result of reduced demand. The body is doing less, and because it is doing less, it requires less strength to continue functioning. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations were constantly interacting with forms of resistance that could not be removed. The environment presented challenges that required ongoing adjustment, and the body maintained its strength by responding to those challenges repeatedly. There was no consistent path that avoided effort. Even simple actions involved a degree of resistance that reinforced physical capacity over time. This constant interaction created a system where strength was maintained naturally, without the need for deliberate intervention. In modern conditions, the removal of resistance changes this system. The body is no longer exposed to the same level of continuous challenge, and as a result, it does not receive the signals needed to maintain a broad range of strength. It adapts to the absence of resistance by lowering its baseline, aligning itself with a world that asks less from it. This adaptation is not experienced as a loss, because it occurs in parallel with a reduction in demand. The body continues to meet the requirements of daily life, and because those requirements are lower, the reduction in strength remains hidden. The disappearance is not caused by a sudden failure or a visible decline. It is shaped by a gradual removal of the forces that once required the body to maintain more, allowing strength to fade in ways that feel natural, efficient, and almost impossible to notice as they unfold. The removal of resistance does not happen only in large, obvious ways. It also unfolds through small adjustments that reshape how the body interacts with the world at a very fine level. These adjustments often go unnoticed because they are built into objects, spaces, and routines that feel ordinary. A surface that remains flat from one step to the next removes the need for constant correction. An object that is shaped for easy handling reduces the need for grip variation. A path that is shortened or made direct removes the need for sustained effort across distance. Each of these changes seems minor, but together they alter the pattern of movement in a consistent direction, one that gradually reduces the signals the body relies on to maintain strength. In earlier human environments, these signals were present in almost every interaction. The body was not only responding to large challenges, but to countless small ones that required adjustment without conscious attention. The ground might shift slightly underfoot, requiring balance to be maintained through subtle muscular engagement. Objects might not fit evenly in the hands, requiring constant correction in grip and posture. Even the act of changing direction involved navigating irregular terrain, where each step was slightly different from the last. These small variations did not demand extreme effort, but they ensured that strength was used across many different systems at once. The body remained active in ways that were distributed and continuous, reinforcing a broad capacity through repetition that never settled into a single pattern. In modern conditions, many of these small variations have been removed. Movement becomes more uniform, more predictable, and more confined within controlled boundaries. The body encounters fewer moments where it must adjust in response to subtle changes, and as a result, the signals that once reinforced strength across multiple systems begin to weaken. The body adapts by focusing on the limited set of movements that remain consistent, refining them for efficiency while allowing other capacities to fade. This process does not feel like a reduction because it improves performance within the familiar range. Movements become smoother, more stable, and less demanding. The body appears to function well, even as its overall capacity narrows. What is lost is not immediately visible because it lies outside of the range that is regularly used. This narrowing is reinforced by the way modern environments are structured to support consistency. Tasks are often designed to be repeated in the same way, with minimal variation from one instance to the next. The body learns these patterns and becomes highly efficient at performing them, reducing the need for broader engagement. Over time, this efficiency becomes the dominant signal, guiding how the body allocates its resources. Strength is maintained where it is most frequently used, and reduced where it is not. The result is a form of adaptation that aligns perfectly with the environment, but no longer reflects the wider range of conditions that once defined human movement. Archaeological evidence suggests that earlier human populations did not experience this level of uniformity. Their environments introduced constant small variations that prevented the body from settling into a narrow pattern. Strength was maintained not through large isolated efforts, but through the accumulation of many small adjustments that occurred throughout the day. These adjustments kept different systems active, ensuring that the body remained prepared for a wide range of movements. In modern life, the absence of these small demands creates a different pattern, one where the body is rarely required to engage beyond a limited set of actions. The disappearance of strength begins here, in the gradual removal of subtle resistance that once existed in every interaction. The body does not recognize this as a loss. It recognizes it as a stable condition, and it adapts accordingly, allowing strength to fade in areas that are no longer reinforced by the environment. As these small reductions in resistance continue to accumulate, they begin to shape the entire rhythm of the body in a way that feels stable but is quietly restrictive. The day becomes a sequence of movements that rarely ask for anything beyond what is already familiar. Each action follows a predictable path. Each transition requires minimal adjustment, and each environment is structured to avoid disruption. The body adapts to this rhythm not by resisting it, but by aligning itself more closely with it. Over time, this alignment becomes so complete that the body no longer prepares for anything outside of it. Strength begins to exist only within the boundaries of what is repeatedly experienced, and anything beyond those boundaries gradually fades from active support. In earlier human environments, such a stable rhythm was difficult to maintain because the conditions of movement were rarely consistent. Even when a person followed a similar route or repeated a familiar task, the details of that experience could change. The ground might shift slightly underfoot, requiring balance to be adjusted without warning. The shape or weight of an object might differ just enough to demand a different form of grip. Weather, terrain, and small variations in the surroundings introduced constant changes that prevented the body from settling into a single pattern. These changes were not dramatic, but they were frequent enough to keep multiple systems engaged. Strength was reinforced across a wide range, because the body was never allowed to rely on a narrow set of movements for long. The modern environment removes much of this variation before it reaches the body. Surfaces remain consistent from one step to the next, reducing the need for constant correction. Objects are designed to be handled in predictable ways, limiting the range of grip and posture required. Distances are structured to be direct and manageable, reducing the need for sustained effort across time. These adjustments create a world where movement becomes repetitive and controlled, allowing the body to operate within a confined range of demand. The body responds by refining its performance within that range, becoming more efficient at repeating the same actions with minimal effort. This efficiency creates a sense of ease, reinforcing the idea that the body is functioning well. Tasks feel manageable, movements feel smooth, and there is no immediate sign of limitation. However, this ease is built on a narrower foundation. The body is no longer maintaining the capacity to respond to variation, because variation is no longer present in a consistent way. Strength that once supported a wide range of movements is gradually reduced, not because it is unnecessary in an absolute sense, but because it is no longer required by the environment that shapes daily life. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that earlier human populations were continuously exposed to small, unpredictable changes that prevented this kind of narrowing. Their bodies were shaped by environments that required constant adjustment, even within routine activities. This created a form of strength that was not tied to specific tasks, but to the ability to respond to variation itself. In modern conditions, the absence of this variation leads to a different form of adaptation. The body becomes specialized, efficient, and stable within a limited range, while losing the broader capacity that once allowed it to respond to a wider set of conditions. This loss does not feel like a decline because it does not disrupt the rhythm of daily life. The environment continues to support the reduced range, keeping demands within limits that the body can meet. The disappearance of strength is therefore embedded in the stability of that rhythm. It is not marked by a sudden change, but by the quiet consistency of a world that no longer challenges the body in the ways it once did, allowing strength to fade while everything continues to feel the same. One of the most difficult things to notice about disappearing strength is that the body can continue to feel normal while it is gradually narrowing what it can do. This is possible because normal does not mean complete. It only means familiar. If the same range of movement, effort, and physical demand is repeated often enough, the body begins to treat that range as the full measure of what is necessary. Anything outside of it becomes less visible, not only in the muscles but in awareness itself. The person does not wake up one morning and feel weaker in a clear or dramatic sense. Instead, the body continues to meet the demands of ordinary life, and that success creates a quiet illusion that nothing important is changing. In earlier human environments, such an illusion was harder to sustain. Daily life exposed the body to variation too often. Strength was tested not through formal exertion but through the unpredictability of ordinary conditions. A path might become steeper, the ground softer, the air colder, the object heavier, the posture less secure. None of these changes needed to be extreme to matter. They only needed to happen often enough to keep the body aware of a wider range of demand. In that kind of world, normal was broad. It included effort, adjustment, imbalance, and unpredictability. The body remained connected to a larger sense of what it might need to do because the environment kept reminding it. Modern life creates a different kind of normal. The ordinary day is often built from repeated actions performed under stable conditions. The body sits in familiar positions, walks on controlled surfaces, handles objects designed for ease, and moves through spaces organized to reduce strain. Because these patterns are repeated so consistently, they begin to define what effort feels like. The body is not comparing the present to the long human past. It is comparing each day only to the one before it. If today feels similar to yesterday, then nothing seems missing. This is how strength can fade beneath the surface of ordinary function. The body remains capable within its reduced range, and because that reduced range is enough for routine life, it feels complete even when it is not. This is the illusion of normal energy. A person may feel that they still have enough energy to get through the day, enough strength to handle familiar tasks, enough control to move without obvious difficulty. That feeling is real, but it is measured against a narrower environment. The body is not saying that nothing has changed. It is only saying that current demands are still being met. This difference matters. In earlier human settings, the line between enough and not enough could shift quickly because the environment was not fixed. The body had to be ready for conditions that were not fully visible in advance. That readiness helped maintain a broader reserve of strength, even when it was not fully used every moment. In modern settings, that reserve is less likely to be maintained because the body learns that it is rarely needed. Over time, enough becomes smaller. The day still works, so the change remains hidden. Archaeological and anthropological evidence supports the broader idea that earlier humans lived in ways that demanded regular, varied physical engagement. Skeletal remains often reflect repeated strain across many parts of the body, suggesting not isolated bursts of effort, but ongoing use shaped by terrain, tools, and movement patterns that modern life often reduces. The important point is not that earlier humans were always exhausted or under constant extreme stress. It is that their baseline of normal physical demand was wider. Their bodies did not have the same opportunity to mistake a narrow range for the whole. In modern life, that mistake becomes easy. The body accepts a limited pattern as sufficient because it continues to function within it. And so, strength can keep disappearing while the person still feels normal, still feels capable, still feels unchanged, because the standard of normal has quietly moved with the loss instead of resisting it. As this sense of normal continues to narrow, the body begins to rely on it as a stable reference, using it to interpret every new experience of effort. What once felt easy becomes the standard, and anything that exceeds it is quietly reclassified as difficult. This reclassification does not feel like a loss of strength. It feels like a change in the world. A task that once required little attention now seems to demand more focus, more energy, more care. The body does not immediately recognize that its own capacity has shifted. Instead, it assumes that the task itself has become more challenging, or that the conditions are somehow less favorable. This shift in interpretation reinforces the illusion that nothing has changed internally, even as the underlying capacity continues to adjust downward. In earlier human environments, such a stable reference point was difficult to maintain because the range of effort was constantly shifting. One moment might involve steady walking, another might require climbing, lifting, or adjusting to unstable ground. These variations prevented the body from settling into a fixed idea of what effort should feel like. The perception of difficulty remained flexible, expanding and contracting with the environment. Because of this, the body retained a broader awareness of its own capacity. It did not anchor itself to a single level of demand, and so it was less likely to reinterpret changes in strength as changes in the world. Modern conditions encourage the opposite pattern. The body is exposed to a consistent level of effort across repeated activities, and this consistency allows a fixed reference point to form. Over time, this reference becomes the lens through which all movement is judged. When a task falls outside of this familiar range, it feels disproportionately demanding, even if it would have been considered ordinary in a different context. The body responds by adjusting behavior to stay within the comfortable range, not out of conscious avoidance, but because that range has come to define what feels appropriate. This adjustment reduces the likelihood of encountering higher levels of demand, which in turn reduces the signals that would maintain a broader capacity. The cycle reinforces itself quietly. Reduced strength leads to a narrower sense of normal, and a narrower sense of normal leads to fewer experiences that challenge the body to maintain strength. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations were less able to sustain such cycles because their environments did not remain stable enough to support them. Variation interrupted any attempt to settle into a narrow pattern, requiring the body to continually adjust its expectations and responses. Strength was maintained not only through use, but through the necessity of responding to conditions that could not be predicted or controlled. In modern life, where conditions are more stable, the body is allowed to settle into a limited range without interruption. This stability feels like comfort, but it also allows the gradual reduction of strength to continue without resistance. The body is still adapting, still aligning itself with what it experiences most often, but the scope of that experience has become smaller. As a result, the perception of normal effort becomes more constrained, and the difference between what the body can do and what it once maintained becomes harder to recognize. Strength continues to fade within this narrowing frame, not as a sudden loss, but as a quiet shift in both capacity and perception, each one reinforcing the other in a way that feels natural and unremarkable. As this narrowing of normal continues, the body begins to align not only its capacity and perception, but also its expectations about what the future will require. It no longer prepares for a wide range of possibilities. Instead, it prepares for repetition. The same types of movements, the same levels of effort, and the same predictable conditions become the template for what is assumed to come next. This expectation shapes how the body maintains strength, because it determines what the body believes it will need to be ready for. When the future is expected to look like the present, there is no reason to maintain capacity beyond what is already being used. In earlier human environments, such a stable expectation was difficult to form. The future was not a continuation of the present in a simple or predictable way. A familiar path could change, a routine task could become more demanding, and conditions could shift without warning. The body remained prepared for this uncertainty by maintaining a broader range of strength, not because it anticipated specific events, but because it was repeatedly exposed to variation. This exposure prevented the formation of a narrow expectation, keeping the body connected to a wider sense of what might be required. Strength was maintained as a form of readiness, supported by the constant possibility of change. Modern conditions reduce this possibility by creating environments where change is minimized and variation is controlled. The body learns that what happens today is likely to happen again tomorrow, and it adapts to this pattern by narrowing its preparation. Movements are anticipated in advance, performed in familiar ways, and completed within a limited range of effort. The body becomes efficient at predicting what will happen next, and this efficiency reduces the need to maintain strength for anything outside of that prediction. Over time, this leads to a gradual alignment between expectation and capacity, where both are shaped by the same narrow set of experiences. What makes this alignment difficult to notice is that it feels stable and reliable. The body moves through its environment with a sense of continuity, rarely encountering situations that require unexpected adjustments. Tasks are completed without difficulty, and the absence of disruption reinforces the idea that the current level of strength is sufficient. There is no clear signal that something has been lost, because the environment continues to confirm that nothing more is needed. This confirmation strengthens the illusion of normal, making it harder to recognize the underlying reduction in capacity. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that earlier human populations lived within systems where such confirmation was less consistent. The environment did not reinforce a single pattern of movement or effort. Instead, it introduced enough variation to keep the body engaged across a wider range of conditions. This prevented the body from fully aligning its expectations with a narrow set of experiences, maintaining a broader capacity as a result. In modern life, the stability of the environment allows expectation, perception, and capacity to converge within a limited range. The body becomes well adapted to what it repeatedly encounters, but less prepared for anything beyond it. Strength does not disappear in a way that can be easily felt, because it fades within a system that continues to function smoothly. The body feels normal because its expectations have adjusted along with its capacity. What once required preparation is no longer anticipated, and what is no longer anticipated is no longer maintained. The disappearance of strength is therefore not only a physical process, but a quiet alignment of the body's internal systems with a world that no longer asks for more, allowing the reduction to continue without interruption or awareness. It is easy to assume that the gradual loss of strength is simply a result of aging, something that unfolds naturally as time passes. This explanation feels intuitive because age is visible, measurable, and widely accepted as a factor that changes the body. However, this assumption can hide a more subtle process that begins much earlier and operates alongside age rather than being defined by it. Strength does not wait for later years to begin its decline. It responds to patterns of use and demand at every stage of life, adjusting itself continuously to match the environment it experiences most often. When that environment provides limited physical demand, the body begins to reduce its capacity, regardless of age. This means that the disappearance of strength is not only a timeline, but a pattern shaped by how the body is used day after day. In earlier human environments, the relationship between age and strength was influenced by conditions that required ongoing physical engagement. Movement remained necessary across different stages of life, and the environment continued to provide signals that reinforced strength even as the body changed over time. The body adapted to aging within a context that still demanded effort, maintaining as much capacity as was required to meet those demands. While aging undoubtedly affected physical ability, it did not operate in isolation. It was balanced by a constant interaction with an environment that continued to challenge the body in varied ways. Archaeological evidence suggests that earlier populations often showed signs of sustained physical use across many parts of the body, indicating that engagement did not simply disappear with age. In modern conditions, this balance shifts. The environment often reduces physical demand at the same time that the body begins to change with age. This overlap can make it difficult to separate the effects of one from the other. When strength declines, it is often attributed entirely to aging, even though part of the change may be related to a reduction in use. The body adapts to the lower level of demand by adjusting its baseline, and this adjustment can occur long before any age-related changes become significant. As a result, the decline in strength may begin earlier and progress more quietly than expected, hidden within patterns of daily life that do not require the body to maintain a broader capacity. This creates a situation where age appears to be the primary cause, even though the environment plays a central role in shaping the outcome. The body continues to function within its usual range, and because that range aligns with everyday tasks, the reduction in strength does not feel out of place. It feels consistent with expectations about aging, reinforcing the belief that nothing unusual is happening. However, the important distinction is that the body is responding not only to time, but to the level of demand it experiences. When demand remains low, the body has no reason to maintain higher levels of strength, and it adjusts accordingly. This adjustment can occur at any age, not just later in life. From an evolutionary perspective, this reflects a system that has always been responsive to immediate conditions rather than to abstract timelines. The body does not follow a fixed schedule for maintaining strength. It follows the signals it receives from its environment, reinforcing what is used and reducing what is not. In earlier human contexts, those signals remained strong across different stages of life, helping to sustain a broader capacity even as the body aged. In modern contexts, those signals are often weaker, allowing strength to diminish more quickly or more quietly. The result is a form of change that is attributed to aging, but is also deeply connected to how the body is engaged in everyday life. Strength fades not only because time passes, but because the conditions that once required it are no longer present in the same way. And without those conditions, the body gradually lets go of what it no longer needs to maintain. When strength begins to fade within a low-demand environment, it often follows a pattern that is mistaken for natural aging, even when it is shaped by something else. The body does not label its changes. It does not separate what comes from time and what comes from reduced use. It simply responds to the signals it receives most often. If those signals remain limited, the body adjusts its capacity downward, and this adjustment can happen at any stage of life. Because the change is gradual and aligns with familiar expectations about aging, it rarely stands out as something distinct. Instead, it blends into a general sense that the body is becoming less capable over time, even when part of that change is driven by how the body is being used. In earlier human environments, this blending was less likely to occur in the same way. Physical demand did not disappear as a person grew older. The environment continued to require movement, even if the form or intensity of that movement changed. Tasks might have shifted, but they still involved engagement with the body in varied ways. This ongoing interaction provided continuous feedback, making it easier to distinguish between the effects of aging and the effects of reduced capacity. If strength declined, it would be revealed through difficulty in tasks that remain necessary. The body could not fully adapt downward without encountering resistance that required it to maintain or restore its capacity. This created a clearer connection between physical ability and the conditions of life, preventing the quiet merging of different causes into a single explanation. In modern conditions, the environment often reduces demand at the same time that age-related changes begin to appear. This overlap creates a smoother, more gradual transition, where the body adjusts without clear interruption. When a movement feels more difficult, it is often attributed to age, because age provides an immediate and widely accepted explanation. The possibility that reduced use is contributing to the change is less visible, because it does not produce a distinct moment of contrast. The body continues to function within its usual range, and because that range is supported by the environment, the reduction in strength remains hidden beneath a sense of normal progression. This interpretation is reinforced by the way daily life is structured. Tasks rarely require the body to move beyond its established limits, and so there are few opportunities to reveal whether those limits have changed. The body adapts to the level of demand it experiences, and when that demand is low, it maintains only what is necessary to meet it. Over time, this creates a baseline that feels appropriate for the individual stage of life, even if it reflects a narrower capacity than before. The absence of variation prevents the body from being challenged in ways that would make the distinction more visible. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations experienced a different balance. Their environments did not provide consistent opportunities to reduce physical demand, and so the body remained engaged across a wider range of conditions. This engagement did not prevent aging, but it shaped how aging was expressed. Strength was maintained as long as it was required, and reductions in capacity were more directly connected to the limits imposed by the body itself, rather than by the absence of demand. In modern life, this connection becomes less clear. The body continues to adapt to its surroundings, but those surroundings no longer require the same level of engagement. As a result, changes that might once have been attributed to reduced use become associated with age, because both processes occur together. Strength fades within this overlap, guided by patterns that feel natural and expected, even though they are influenced by conditions that extend beyond the passage of time alone. As this overlap between reduced use and aging continues, the body gradually forms a single narrative to explain what is happening. It does not separate the causes, it experiences the result and aligns its expectations around it. Strength feels lower, effort feels higher, and the simplest explanation becomes the most stable one, that this is what happens over time. This narrative is not incorrect, but it is incomplete. It reflects what is visible, not what is shaping that visibility. The body accepts this explanation because it matches the patterns it experiences most often, and once it is accepted, it begins to guide how future changes are interpreted. Each small reduction in strength reinforces the same idea, creating a sense of continuity that makes the process feel inevitable. In earlier human environments, such a unified narrative was more difficult to sustain because the body was repeatedly exposed to conditions that disrupted it. A day of lower demand might be followed by a situation that required more strength, more balance, or more coordination. These variations made it harder to attribute changes in capacity to a single cause, because the body was constantly being tested in different ways. If strength declined, the environment would reveal it through increased difficulty, but it would also provide opportunities for the body to respond and adjust. This created a dynamic relationship between aging and use, where neither factor could fully define the outcome on its own. Strength was shaped by both, and the body remained connected to that balance through continuous interaction with its surroundings. Modern conditions allow a different pattern to take hold. The environment often remains stable enough for the body to settle into a consistent interpretation of its own changes. When strength decreases, the body does not encounter enough variation to challenge that interpretation. Tasks remain within a manageable range, and the absence of disruption reinforces the idea that the current level of capacity is appropriate. The body aligns its expectations with this stability, adjusting its sense of what is possible in a way that feels natural. Over time, this alignment becomes more complete, narrowing both capacity and expectation together. The important point is that this narrowing is not experienced as a deviation from normal. It becomes normal itself. The body is not comparing its current state to a distant past. It is comparing each moment to the one that came before it, and as long as that comparison remains consistent, the process feels continuous rather than reductive. Strength fades within this continuity, guided by patterns that do not signal loss, but stability. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations were less likely to experience this kind of uninterrupted continuity. Their environments introduced enough variation to prevent a single narrative from fully explaining changes in the body. Strength was maintained through use, challenged through variation, and shaped by aging in ways that remained connected to real conditions. In modern life, the reduction of variation allows the body to settle into a simpler explanation, one that blends different causes into a single, stable understanding. This understanding feels accurate because it reflects lived experience, but it also obscures the role of the environment in shaping that experience. The disappearance of strength continues within this framework, not as a sudden or visible decline, but as a gradual alignment between what the body expects, what it experiences, and what it is asked to do. The result is a form of change that feels inevitable, even though it is guided by conditions that have quietly shifted over time, allowing strength to diminish while remaining consistent with the story the body has learned to tell itself. The body does not move toward less strength in a sudden or dramatic way. It moves in a direction that is almost always downward when the signals around it remain low. This downward movement is not a collapse. It is a form of adaptation that follows the same principles the body has always used to survive. When effort is required, the body builds toward it. When effort is not required, the body gradually releases what it no longer needs to maintain. This release is careful, measured, and continuous, shaped by patterns that repeat across time rather than by isolated moments. It does not draw attention because it does not interrupt function. The body continues to do what it is asked to do, and as long as that remains true, the process remains hidden. In earlier human environments, this downward direction was constantly interrupted. The body could not remain at a lower level of capacity for long because the environment would eventually require more. A path might demand greater balance, a task might involve heavier effort, or a situation might call for a sudden response that exceeded the usual pattern. These moments did not need to be extreme. They only needed to occur often enough to remind the body that a broader range of strength was still necessary. Each interruption acted as a signal, pushing the body to maintain or restore what had begun to fade. The overall direction of adaptation was therefore balanced, moving neither consistently upward nor consistently downward, but adjusting in response to variation that prevented long-term decline. In modern conditions, these interruptions become less frequent. The environment is structured to reduce unexpected demands, creating a pattern where effort remains within a stable and predictable range. The body receives the same signals repeatedly, and without variation to challenge them, it begins to follow a more consistent path. That path leads downward, not because the body is deteriorating, but because it is aligning itself with a level of demand that no longer requires a broader capacity. Each day that passes without significant variation reinforces this direction, confirming that the current level of strength is sufficient. Over time, the body adjusts its baseline to match this repeated condition, lowering its capacity in a way that feels natural and unremarkable. What makes this downward adaptation difficult to notice is that it preserves function within the familiar range. The body does not remove the ability to perform everyday tasks. It refines that ability, becoming more efficient at doing less. Movements remain smooth, controlled, and manageable, reinforcing the sense that nothing has changed. The reduction occurs outside of this familiar range, in areas that are no longer required by daily life. Because these areas are rarely tested, their disappearance does not produce immediate consequences. The body continues to operate within its expected limits, and those limits are rarely exceeded. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations lived in conditions where such a steady downward path would have been difficult to maintain. The environment introduced enough variation to interrupt any prolonged reduction in capacity, keeping the body engaged across a wider range of movement. Strength was maintained not through constant effort, but through the regular presence of conditions that required more than the minimum. In modern life, the absence of these conditions allows the downward adaptation to continue without interruption. The body follows the signals it receives, and when those signals remain low, it adjusts accordingly. The disappearance of strength is therefore not a sudden loss, but a direction, one that is guided by the consistency of the environment and reinforced by the absence of demands that would require the body to maintain more than it currently needs. Once this downward adaptation begins, it rarely feels like movement in any direction at all. The body does not experience it as decline. It experiences it as adjustment. Each day that passes within a limited range of effort confirms the same message. This is enough. This is what must be maintained, and nothing beyond it appears necessary. The body listens to repetition more than to intention. It does not respond most strongly to what a person believes they should be able to do. It responds to what is asked of it again and again across ordinary time. This is why the downward movement of strength can continue even when a person still feels active, still moves regularly, and still believes that nothing essential has changed. The body is not measuring itself against a larger human past. It is measuring itself against the narrow conditions that surround it now. In earlier human environments, such a narrow measurement was difficult to sustain because ordinary life kept interrupting it. Daily movement did not stay within one predictable range for very long. A route could become steeper, a surface less stable, a carried weight more awkward, or a period of rest shorter than expected. These variations forced the body to remain connected to more than the minimum. Strength was not preserved because the body wanted excess. It was preserved because daily life repeatedly crossed beyond the easiest level of effort. These crossings acted as small corrections, preventing the body from drifting too far downward. They reminded the organism that a wider capacity was still part of survival, even if not every moment required it equally. Modern life changes this pattern by removing many of those corrections. The body can now pass through long stretches of time without being asked to exceed its usual range. Each repeated day strengthens the same narrow baseline, and that baseline gradually becomes the standard for maintenance. The body does not resist this process because, from its perspective, there is no reason to do so. It is still succeeding. It is still completing tasks. It is still aligned with its environment. The change happens not in what the body can do today, but in what it stops preparing to do tomorrow. This is where the downward adaptation becomes especially quiet. It reduces readiness before it produces obvious weakness. The body begins to let go of capacities that are not being confirmed by experience, and because those capacities are not part of routine life, their disappearance does not immediately matter. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations lived under conditions where the body was less able to settle into such a quiet downward path. The environment kept reintroducing demands that exceeded the ordinary, even if only slightly. This prevented the body from fully trusting a reduced baseline. It had to remain somewhat broader, somewhat less specialized, because the world did not remain stable enough to support a narrow form of readiness. In modern conditions, stability itself becomes the force that guides reduction. The smoother the rhythm of life, the more confidently the body can adapt downward. It becomes efficient within a smaller range, and that efficiency hides the reduction that made it possible. The body appears stable, but the stability is selective. It is built on the continued absence of demands that would require more. This is why disappearing strength can feel so invisible. The body is not collapsing. It is becoming increasingly well matched to a world that keeps asking for less. And the longer that world remains consistent, the more natural the downward direction begins to feel, until reduced strength no longer seems like a change at all, but simply the quiet shape of normal life. As this downward direction continues over longer periods of time, it begins to shape not only what the body can do, but how it responds to the absence of challenge itself. The body becomes accustomed to a state where nothing unexpected is required, and this absence gradually turns into a form of expectation. It is no longer simply that the body adapts to lower demand. It begins to assume that higher demand will not return. This assumption changes how the body prepares, how it allocates energy, and how it maintains strength. What is not expected is not supported, and what is not supported slowly fades from active capacity. This process is not dramatic, but it is steady, guided by repetition rather than by any single event. In earlier human environments, such an assumption would have been difficult to sustain because the absence of challenge was rarely consistent. Even periods of relative ease were often followed by conditions that required more effort. The body could not fully commit to a reduced state because it would soon be asked to respond to something outside of it. This created a form of balance where strength was not maintained at its highest level at all times, but was never allowed to drift too far downward. Each new demand acted as a reminder that the body needed to remain prepared for variation, even if that variation was not constant. The environment prevented the body from settling into a stable expectation of low demand. Modern conditions allow that expectation to take hold more completely. The environment often remains consistent enough for the body to trust that tomorrow will resemble today. Movement stays within familiar patterns, effort remains predictable, and the absence of variation reinforces the idea that nothing more will be required. The body responds by aligning its preparation with this expectation, maintaining only the strength necessary to support what it encounters regularly. Over time, this alignment becomes more pronounced, narrowing the range of capacity that the body continues to support. What lies outside of that range is no longer reinforced, and without reinforcement, it gradually disappears. What makes this process particularly difficult to recognize is that it preserves the appearance of stability. The body continues to function effectively within its expected range, completing tasks without difficulty and maintaining a sense of control. There is no sudden failure, no clear signal that would indicate a loss of strength. The reduction occurs in areas that are not being tested, and because they are not tested, their disappearance does not interrupt daily life. The body remains aligned with its environment, and that alignment creates a sense of continuity that hides the direction of change. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations lived in conditions where such continuity was constantly disrupted. The environment did not allow the body to fully trust a narrow expectation of demand. Variation ensured that strength was maintained across a wider range, even if not all of it was used at the same time. In modern life, the absence of disruption allows the body to follow a more consistent path, one that leads gradually downward as long as the signals remain low. The body is not moving toward weakness as a goal, it is moving toward efficiency within the conditions it experiences most often. Strength fades as a result of that efficiency, not because it is actively taken away, but because it is no longer required to be present. The disappearance is therefore not a moment, but a direction, shaped by a world that no longer asks for more, and a body that has learned to trust that it never will. The changes in strength that occur within a single body do not remain isolated to that individual. Over time, they begin to appear across groups, shaping what each generation considers normal. This shift is subtle because it does not happen all at once. It unfolds gradually as patterns of movement, effort, and environment are shared across people living in similar conditions. The body adapts to what it experiences most often, and when many bodies experience the same reduced level of demand, the result is not just an individual adjustment, but a collective one. Strength in this sense is not only a personal attribute, it is also a reflection of the environment that surrounds a population over time. In earlier human environments, this collective baseline was shaped by conditions that required consistent physical engagement. Movement remained necessary across different stages of life, and variation in terrain, climate, and daily activity ensured that the body was regularly exposed to a wide range of demands. Because these conditions were shared, they created a common level of physical capacity that was maintained across generations. Children grew into environments where movement was unavoidable, and their bodies adapted accordingly. Adults continued to engage with those same conditions, reinforcing strength through daily life rather than through isolated effort. The baseline of what was considered normal strength remained connected to the environment, not to individual choice. Archaeological and anthropological evidence suggests that these shared conditions left consistent traces across populations. Skeletal remains often reflect patterns of use that are similar within groups, indicating that the environment shaped bodies in comparable ways over time. This does not mean that every individual had the same capacity, but it does suggest that the range of variation was influenced by the demands of the environment. Strength was not defined by isolated behavior, but by the structure of daily life that applied to everyone within that setting. In modern conditions, this shared structure changes. The environment reduces physical demand in ways that affect entire populations, not just individuals. Movement becomes more optional, more limited, and more predictable across groups. As a result, the signals that maintain strength become weaker at a collective level. Each person adapts to these signals in their own way, but the overall pattern remains similar. Strength begins to align with a lower baseline, one that reflects the reduced demands of the environment rather than the broader capacity the body once maintained. This shift is difficult to notice because it is distributed across time and across people. No single moment marks the change. Instead, each generation grows into a slightly different set of conditions, shaping their bodies according to what is required in their environment. The difference between one generation and the next may be small, but over longer periods, these small adjustments can accumulate. What was once considered a normal level of strength may gradually become less common, replaced by a new standard that feels equally normal within its own context. The body does not recognize this as a decline. It recognizes it as adaptation, aligning itself with the conditions it experiences. From an evolutionary perspective, this reflects the same principle that has always guided human development. The body responds to its environment, and when that environment changes, the body changes with it. The difference is that modern environments reduce physical demand in ways that can persist across generations, allowing the downward adjustment of strength to become part of a broader pattern. This pattern is not experienced as a loss because it is shared. Each individual measures themselves against the people around them, and when everyone is adapting to similar conditions, the change becomes difficult to detect. Strength fades not only within the individual body, but within the collective sense of what is normal, shaped by environments that no longer require as much as they once did. As this shared baseline continues to shift, each generation grows into a version of the world that already reflects the adjustments made by those before it. The body does not begin from a fixed point that remains constant across time. It begins from whatever conditions are present, and those conditions carry the imprint of previous adaptations. When physical demand has been reduced over many years, the environment that a new generation encounters is already shaped by that reduction. Movement patterns are established, spaces are structured, and expectations are set in ways that reflect a lower level of required strength. The body adapts to this starting point without reference to what came before, because it has no direct experience of a different baseline. In earlier human environments, this kind of gradual shift was less likely to accumulate in the same direction. Conditions could change, but they did not consistently reduce physical demand across long periods of time. The environment remained varied enough to continue reinforcing a wide range of movement and strength. Even as generations passed, the basic requirements of daily life remained similar in their need for physical engagement. Children grew into patterns that resembled those of their predecessors, and their bodies adapted accordingly. Strength was maintained across generations not because it was preserved intentionally, but because the environment continued to require it. The signals remained strong, and the body responded to those signals in consistent ways. In modern conditions, the direction of change becomes more stable. Physical demand is reduced in ways that persist, and these reductions are carried forward as part of the environment itself. A new generation does not encounter the same range of variation that existed in earlier human contexts. Instead, it encounters a world where movement is more controlled, more predictable, and less demanding. The body adapts to this world as if it were the standard, because it is the only one it knows. Strength is developed within this narrower range, and because the environment continues to support that range, there is little reason for the body to extend beyond it. This creates a form of continuity where each generation aligns with the same reduced level of demand, reinforcing it further. What makes this process difficult to detect is that it does not produce a clear contrast within a single lifetime. The body compares itself to its immediate surroundings, not to distant historical conditions. When everyone around it is adapting to similar patterns, the resulting level of strength feels normal. There is no obvious point of comparison that would reveal a broader capacity. The change becomes visible only when viewed across longer periods, where small adjustments accumulate into noticeable differences. Even then, the interpretation of those differences is shaped by the same assumptions that guided the adaptation. Strength is seen as something that naturally varies across time, rather than something that is closely tied to the structure of the environment. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier populations were more closely linked to environmental conditions that maintained a consistent level of physical demand. Their bodies reflected those conditions in ways that were shared across groups and sustained across generations. In modern life, the environment itself becomes the carrier of change, passing along patterns of reduced demand that shape how each new generation develops. The body continues to adapt efficiently, but it adapts to a world that no longer requires the same breadth of strength. Over time, this creates a collective baseline that is narrower than before, not because the body has lost its capacity to maintain strength, but because it is no longer being asked to do so in the same way. The disappearance of strength becomes part of the environment itself, shaping each generation without drawing attention to the process that created it. As this pattern continues across generations, the change becomes less about individuals and more about how an entire group understands its own limits. The body no longer carries a clear memory of a broader capacity, because that capacity is not regularly expressed in the environment it inhabits. What once might have been considered a temporary reduction becomes a stable baseline, reinforced not only by daily life but by the shared expectations of those living within it. People observe one another, measure themselves against those around them, and adjust their sense of what is possible accordingly. When everyone is adapting to similar conditions, the collective standard shifts quietly, and the body accepts that shift without resistance. In earlier human environments, this collective understanding was anchored by the demands of the world itself. The environment set the terms, and those terms required a certain level of engagement that could not be easily reduced. Individuals might vary in their abilities, but the overall range was shaped by conditions that applied to everyone. Movement remained necessary, variation remained present, and strength was reinforced as part of the shared experience of living within that environment. The body did not rely on comparison alone to define its limits. It relied on continuous interaction with conditions that made those limits visible. In modern conditions, the environment becomes more accommodating, allowing a wider range of individual variation without immediate consequence. Tasks can be completed within a lower range of strength, and the absence of strong physical demand allows the body to settle into that range without being challenged to expand. As a result, comparison becomes a more influential factor in shaping perception. The body looks outward to determine what is normal, and when that outward reference reflects a reduced baseline, the internal sense of capacity adjusts to match it. This adjustment is not conscious, but it is consistent. Each generation inherits not only a physical environment, but a set of expectations about what that environment requires. Over time, these expectations become part of how the body interprets its own abilities. What makes this process particularly subtle is that it preserves a sense of adequacy. The body continues to function within its environment, and because that environment supports the reduced range, there is no immediate reason to question it. Strength is not perceived as lacking, because the tasks that define daily life do not require more. The collective baseline feels sufficient, even though it may represent a narrower capacity than what the human body once maintained in different conditions. This sense of sufficiency reinforces the pattern, allowing it to continue across generations without interruption. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations experienced a closer alignment between environmental demand and physical capacity, where the body's limits were regularly tested and adjusted in response to real conditions. In modern life, that alignment shifts. The environment allows the body to operate within a reduced range, and the collective understanding of what is normal follows that reduction. Strength fades not only because it is used less, but because the context in which it is measured has changed. The body no longer compares itself to a broader human possibility. It compares itself to what is immediately around it. And when that reference is narrow, the sense of capacity becomes narrow as well. The disappearance of strength becomes embedded in this shared perception, shaped by a world that no longer requires more, and a collective understanding that no longer expects it. Even when strength fades, the body does not become empty of its older design. It continues to carry traces of a deeper history, small reminders that it was shaped for a world more physically demanding than the one most people now inhabit. These traces do not remain as fully expressed abilities unless the environment continues to call them forward, but they are still present in the structure of the body itself. The shape of the human frame, the arrangement of joints, the coordination between balance and movement, and the way muscles respond to repeated demand all suggest a body built not for stillness, but for regular varied engagement with the physical world. This matters because it means disappearing strength is not the same as permanent absence. What fades from daily life may still remain as a dormant possibility, hidden beneath routines that no longer require it. In earlier human environments, this possibility was not hidden for long. The landscape, the climate, the need to carry, walk, bend, climb, and adjust to unstable conditions kept drawing it out. The body's older design remained visible because it was constantly being used. Archaeological evidence points toward this through the repeated marks left on bone and joint surfaces, which suggest not isolated moments of effort, but ongoing interaction with varied terrain and regular physical demand. These traces do not tell us everything about daily life, and they do not allow absolute certainty about every prehistoric detail, but they do support a broad and widely accepted picture. The human body spent most of its history in conditions that asked more from it than modern environments usually do. Because those conditions were consistent across long stretches of time, the body retained a wide range of readiness. In modern life, that readiness is less visible because the signals that once called it forward have become weaker. The body is still capable of adaptation, still responsive to repeated demand, still organized around systems that can coordinate force, balance, and endurance together. But when daily life remains narrow and predictable, these deeper capacities stay quiet. They do not disappear all at once, and they are not completely erased. Instead, they recede from ordinary awareness. This creates an important contrast. A person may feel that strength has vanished, when what has actually vanished first is the environment that used to reveal it. The body still carries the logic of a longer human past, but it now lives in a world that rarely asks for that logic to be expressed. This is why moments of unexpected effort can feel strangely revealing. A longer walk across uneven ground, the need to carry weight in an awkward way, or the sudden demand for balance and coordination can produce not only difficulty, but also a faint sense that the body is encountering something old, something familiar in a deeper way than routine life usually allows. That feeling is not proof of some lost perfection, and it should not be exaggerated into a romantic story about the past. Earlier human life was difficult, uncertain, and often harsh. But the body that emerged from that history was shaped by constant interaction with real physical demands, and the traces of that shaping have not vanished simply because modern life has changed. Anthropological and evolutionary perspectives suggest that the human organism remains highly responsive to what it is repeatedly asked to do. This means that the older pattern has not been fully removed. It has become less visible because the environment no longer reinforces it with the same consistency. Strength, in this sense, is not only something that disappears, it is also something whose deeper outline can still be found in the body's lingering architecture, in the quiet way joints align for movement, in the body's ability to adapt when demand returns, and in the persistent signs that human beings began in a world where physical capacity was not separate from daily life, but woven into the ordinary act of continuing from one day to the next. These deeper traces do not remain fixed in the same way across time. They respond, quietly but consistently, to the patterns that are repeated in daily life. The body does not hold on to its older design as something separate from present conditions. Instead, it adjusts how much of that design is expressed, depending on what is being used. When movement is narrow and predictable, the broader capacities remain in the background, less visible and less active. When variation increases, even slightly, those capacities can begin to reappear, not as something entirely new, but as something that was always part of the body's structure. This responsiveness is central to understanding why strength can both fade and return without dramatic transitions. In earlier human environments, this responsiveness was constantly engaged. The body did not need to shift between states of activity and inactivity in a sharp way, because variation was already built into the flow of daily life. A person might walk, carry, bend, adjust, and rest in patterns that change from one moment to the next, creating a continuous exchange between demand and adaptation. The body remained connected to a wider range of movement because it was regularly required to move across that range. There was no clear boundary where one type of strength stopped and another began. Instead, strength was maintained as a flexible capacity, shaped by the constant presence of different conditions that required different responses. Archaeological observations support the idea that such variability left consistent marks on the body. Skeletal structures often reflect repeated engagement across multiple planes of movement, suggesting that the body was not confined to a single pattern of use. These traces do not tell a complete story, and they do not allow precise reconstruction of daily life, but they do align with a broader understanding that early human movement involved continuous adjustment rather than repetition within a narrow range. The body adapted to that adjustment by maintaining systems that could respond in multiple ways without needing to be reactivated from a dormant state. In modern conditions, the body's responsiveness is still present, but it is less frequently called upon. Daily life often remains within a limited set of movements, and the body becomes efficient within that set. The broader capacities do not disappear immediately, but they are not reinforced in the same way. They become quieter, less active, and less visible in ordinary experience. This can create the impression that they are gone, when in fact they have simply been reduced in their expression. The body continues to hold the potential for variation, but it does not maintain that potential at the same level when it is not required. This is why moments of increased demand can feel both unfamiliar and strangely coherent at the same time. The body may respond with effort, but it also shows signs of underlying coordination that suggests a deeper pattern at work. Anthropological and evolutionary perspectives emphasize that the human organism remains highly adaptable, capable of adjusting its structure and function in response to repeated conditions. This adaptability is not limited to increasing strength. It also includes the ability to reduce it when it is not needed. The same process that allows capacity to grow allows it to shrink, depending on the signals the body receives. In earlier environments, those signals tended to support a broader range of strength. In modern environments, they often support a narrower one. The deeper design of the body has not been removed, but its expression has changed, shaped by a world that no longer requires it to be fully visible. Strength, in this sense, is not only something that disappears, it is something that shifts in and out of expression, depending on how often the body is asked to move beyond what has become familiar. What remains in the body from that older human history is not a perfect memory, but a set of tendencies that can still be recognized when the environment changes enough to call them forward. The body still carries structures that make sense only in relation to a more demanding physical world. It still responds to repeated variation, still coordinates balance with force, still reorganizes itself when daily life begins to require more than a narrow routine. These are not signs that the body is unchanged from the distant past, and they should not be turned into a simple story about lost natural strength waiting intact beneath modern life. The body changes with its conditions, and it does so continuously, but it also does not begin from nothing each day. It begins from a long inheritance, one shaped across most of human history by landscapes, burdens, distances, and irregular forms of movement that kept strength tied closely to survival. In earlier human environments, that inheritance remained visible because it was always being used. The body was not asked to prove itself through occasional effort. It was asked to remain physically responsive as part of ordinary existence. Walking meant adjusting to terrain rather than crossing a controlled surface. Carrying meant working with shifting shapes and uncertain weight, rather than fixed and predictable loads. Even rest was often temporary, incomplete, or shaped by ground and weather in ways that kept the body connected to its surroundings. This did not make earlier humans superhuman, and it does not mean prehistoric life should be idealized. It means only that the body's broader capacities remained in view because daily life kept summoning them. Archaeological and anthropological evidence cannot tell us everything with precision, but it supports a widely accepted picture in which the human frame was repeatedly shaped by regular physical variation rather than by narrow repetition alone. In modern life, much of that variation has been reduced before it reaches the body. The older design remains, but the world no longer reveals it with the same frequency. This is why strength can seem gone when it may be more accurate to say that it has become less visible, less expressed, and less necessary within the structure of daily life. The body continues to be organized in ways that respond to repeated demand, but when demand remains low and predictable, those deeper responses stay quiet. They do not disappear as a single event. They recede through disuse, becoming harder to notice precisely because routine life does not require them to appear. Yet their outline can still be sensed in the way the body reacts when movement becomes less controlled and more real, when balance must be regained rather than assumed, when force must be coordinated across the whole frame rather than delivered through a familiar and limited pattern. These moments do not prove that a full older capacity has been preserved untouched. They show something more careful and more useful, that the human body still carries a relationship to movement shaped by a much longer past than the one most people live in now. From an evolutionary perspective, this is not surprising. The body remains adaptive, and adaptation does not erase all traces of previous conditions, it reshapes their expression. What the modern environment hides, it does not always destroy. What daily life no longer reinforces, the body no longer maintains at full strength, but the deeper architecture of response remains part of the organism. This matters because it changes the meaning of disappearing strength. It suggests that what has been lost from ordinary life is not only force itself, but the conditions that once kept force visible, necessary, and woven into the day. The body still remembers enough of that older design to respond when the world truly asks for it, But in a world that rarely asks, that memory becomes quiet, and the quietness is so complete that it can feel as though nothing was ever there at all. When the body has adjusted itself so completely to a narrow range of demand, a quiet question begins to emerge, one that does not have a simple or immediate answer. If strength is shaped by what is required, and if what is required continues to decrease, then what defines the true limits of the human body? The answer cannot be found only in what the body currently does, because what it does is already shaped by an environment that asks less than it once did. The body appears stable, functional, and capable within that environment, but this appearance reflects adaptation, not the full extent of what might be possible under different conditions. The difficulty is that modern life rarely provides a clear point of comparison. Without regular exposure to broader physical demands, the body has little reason to reveal what lies beyond its usual range. In earlier human environments, this question was less abstract because the answer was constantly being tested. The limits of strength were not defined by reflection, but by interaction with the world. A task either required more or it did not, and the body responded accordingly. There was no need to imagine a wider capacity, because the environment itself brought that capacity into use whenever it was needed. Variation ensured that the body remained connected to more than a single level of demand, preventing it from settling into a fixed understanding of its own limits. Strength was not measured against a static baseline. It was experienced across a shifting range that kept the question of limits open through continuous engagement. Modern conditions allow the body to move through long periods without encountering anything that challenges its current capacity. The environment supports a level of activity that can be maintained even as strength gradually narrows, and because that level is sufficient for daily life, it becomes the reference point for what feels possible. The body adapts to this reference, aligning its expectations and its structure with what it encounters most often. Over time, this creates a sense of certainty that the current range reflects the true limits of ability, even though it may represent only a portion of what the body was once prepared to do. This sense of certainty is reinforced by the stability of the environment. Tasks remain consistent, outcomes are predictable, and there are few moments that require a response beyond the familiar. Without those moments, the body has no reason to question its own boundaries. It continues to function within them, and because nothing disrupts that function, the boundaries remain unchallenged. The question of limits becomes quiet, not because it has been answered, but because it is no longer being asked by the conditions of daily life. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives suggest that earlier human populations lived in conditions where such questions remained active, even if they were never consciously framed. The environment introduced enough variation to prevent the body from settling into a narrow understanding of its own capacity. Strength was maintained across a wider range because it was repeatedly required across that range. In modern life, the absence of that requirement allows the body to settle into a more limited pattern, where capacity and expectation align within a smaller space. The deeper question remains, but it is no longer visible in the same way. It exists beneath the surface of routine, shaped by a long history of adaptation and a present environment that no longer calls it into view. The body continues to respond to what it experiences, and what it experiences continues to define what it becomes, leaving open the possibility that its limits are not fixed, but simply untested within the conditions that now feel normal. The deeper uncertainty is not only about how much strength the body can still produce, but about how much of its older range has become invisible, simply because the world no longer asks for it. A human body can seem complete while living inside a narrow circle of demands. It can move, carry, sit, stand, rise, and continue through ordinary life without obvious failure. From within that circle, it is easy to believe that current function reveals the whole truth. Yet function and fullness are not the same thing. A system can remain workable while still having released large parts of what it once maintained. This is what makes the final question of disappearing strength so difficult to settle. The body still works, and because it still works, the disappearance feels less like loss than like a quiet settling into what appears sufficient. In earlier human environments, such a settling was harder to sustain because ordinary life kept pulling the body beyond any narrow definition of enough. A route could lengthen, a surface could become less stable, a carried burden could become more awkward, a season could alter the texture of effort itself. None of this required dramatic events. It only required that the body remain in contact with a world that did not stay still. That contact prevented the human organism from mistaking a reduced level of function for the whole of its capacity. The body was reminded, again and again, that what felt enough in one moment might not be enough in the next. This created a lived uncertainty, not a philosophical one. The question of strength stayed open because the environment kept reopening it. Modern life closes that question by reducing variation before the body ever has to answer it. The ordinary day is often arranged so that demands remain manageable, surfaces remain stable, and effort remains within familiar boundaries. This does not make life unreal, but it does make the body easier to satisfy. When the body can succeed repeatedly within a limited range, it begins to treat that range as the full measure of what matters. Capacity narrows, expectation narrows with it, and the illusion of completeness becomes stronger. The person does not feel that something essential has been removed. Instead, they feel adapted, adjusted, and still capable enough for the life directly in front of them. The missing piece is not always visible from the inside because the environment no longer provides the contrast that would reveal it. Anthropological and evolutionary perspectives suggest that this is one of the central features of the human organism. It does not preserve broad capacity for symbolic reasons. It preserves what repeated conditions continue to justify. That means the body's present condition is always partly a record of its recent environment. If the environment asks for little, the body becomes little by little more exact, more efficient, and more limited. If the environment asks for more, the body can still respond, though not without cost, delay, or difficulty. This responsiveness is what keeps the final question open. The body is not a fixed machine with a single visible limit. It is a living system whose limits are partly hidden by the conditions under which it has been allowed to operate. This is why the disappearance of strength should not be understood only as decline. It is also a disappearance of evidence. The world no longer shows the body what it still could have been required to hold. And so the final uncertainty remains suspended. Perhaps the body is weaker than it once needed to be. Perhaps it is only quieter. Perhaps much of human strength does not truly vanish until the world has stopped asking for it long enough that even memory, in muscle and posture and expectation, begins to fall silent. The body continues to live inside that silence, still functional, still adapted, yet never fully revealing whether its present limits are real limits, or only the shape of a gentler world that no longer tests them. In the end, the question is not whether the human body has changed. It clearly has, and it always will, because change is one of its deepest rules. The more difficult question is whether the body has changed in a way that reveals its truth, or in a way that conceals it. When strength disappears slowly enough, and when the world around the body keeps adjusting to make that disappearance feel acceptable, the loss no longer looks like loss. It looks like ordinary life. Number. It looks like getting older, getting comfortable, becoming realistic about what the body can do. Yet beneath that realism there remains an older possibility that is harder to measure, harder to prove, and impossible to fully dismiss. For most of human history, the body lived inside conditions that did not allow it to narrow so quietly. Ground, distance, climate, burden, instability, and the ordinary unpredictability of survival kept strength visible because they kept calling it forward. The body was never allowed to forget so completely what it might need to do. In the modern world, by contrast, forgetting has become easier than noticing. The body adapts downward without protest. Expectation contracts with it, and daily life continues smoothly enough that the question of lost capacity is rarely pressed to its limit. What disappears first is not movement itself, but evidence. The body still rises, walks, carries, reaches, and completes the day. It still appears whole within the boundaries of ordinary life. But ordinary life is no longer a reliable measure of the full human range, because it has been shaped to ask less from the organism than the organism was shaped across deep time to endure. Archaeological and anthropological perspectives cannot give a perfect answer to how much strength earlier humans held in every setting, and they should not be forced into romantic certainty. Prehistoric life was harsh, constrained, and often fragile, but the broad picture remains widely accepted. The human body emerged in environments where physical engagement was not optional, where adaptation had to remain broad and where the margin between enough and not enough was regularly tested by the world itself. That long history still matters, because the body has not severed itself from it entirely. It still carries a structure that responds to use, to variation, to repeated demand, and to the quiet return of challenges that routine life often removes. This is why the final answer cannot be a clean conclusion. Strength may be disappearing, but not because the body has suddenly become less human. It may be disappearing because the conditions that once kept human strength in view have grown softer, narrower, and more forgiving. The body has answered that softness with efficiency, and efficiency has hidden the cost. What feels normal may therefore be only a local truth, accurate within the present environment, but incomplete in relation to the longer human story. And that leaves a final thought worth carrying gently into the dark. Perhaps the most important thing the body can lose is not force itself, but the steady contact with a world that once reminded it what force was for. When that reminder fades, strength fades with it, not loudly, not all at once, but quietly enough to pass for ordinary time. So the final question remains open, as it should. If the body only keeps what the world insists on using, then in a world that keeps asking for less and less, how much of human strength has truly vanished, and how much of it is simply waiting in silence, beyond the narrow edge of what modern life still requires?